significant. In this context, the pivotal role of Dr. Mohua Das, Principal, Women's College, Calcutta, for the growth and proliferations of journalism and mass communication studies at our college is enormously significant. Due to her continuous pursuit and guidance, the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication Study in our college since inception has made a mark in Calcutta University. The result of students of our college are consistently impressive, and they are all placed in the career of journalism, public relation, advertising, digital media, and education. Quite encouragingly, worldwide women are doing better in the realm of media studies. Now, let us have great pleasure to welcome and invite our principal madam, Dr. Mohua Das, to address the August gathering, who is behind the success stories of our department and the college at large. Madam.
Thank you, Vishwajit. I am immensely honored to represent this platform. Well, I'm extremely sorry also as well. Yesterday, I had an opportunity to open the webinar on behalf of the College Department of Mass Comm and Journalism. But due to work pressure, I couldn't attend the webinar yesterday. But I have made it some way possible to represent my college institution, which has got an extremely sound journalism and mass comm department. Every year, the students are coming out in flying colors with lots of first classes and the toppers in the Kolkata University, and teachers and the team journalism, including our accuracy coordinator, Surita Basu, and Rashmi. Rashmi is also there. Right now, Rashmi's status, I think.
Yes, ma'am.
Rashmi,
madam. Yes,
okay,
ma'am, I'm here. Okay.
Rashmi is also there. And Vishwajit, the coordinator of our PG department, is very efficient and competent for handling the students. So, all of them, the extreme endeavor they have taken to make this webinar an utmost success, and my students and my other teachers, the staff members of the college, the eminent speakers throughout national and international arena, and the audience. I am extremely thankful to all of you and welcome all of you to this part of the last day of the webinar. And this has got a very pertinent topic, women and media. I myself being a principal of this institution, who's got the maximum, the most of these students are women students. Actually, not most, all the students are women students here in different departments of science and art subjects. So the mass comm and journalism is doing extremely well in this college, and today the seminar is really significant in that matter. So, without wasting time, I would rather utter a few lines about the webinar's topic today. Coursing through history, the woman of the 21st century is perhaps endowed with more visibility in media than her foremothers. Her voice is heard, her words are noted, and her achievements are acknowledged. She is no longer the woman laughing in the shadows of a male guardian. She no longer wields her power from the safety of a curtain. She holds a stage and an audience with grit and gumption. But the question remains whether this she is true for every woman on this planet, or just the selected few with the privilege to access a right to equality. Even our privilege arrives with unseen clauses of gender discrimination, stereotypes, and gender-based violence. As a fourth pillar of democracy, the media plays a crucial role in forming social and cultural attitudes towards women. one cannot deny the stereotypical portrayal of women in media, which has often generated gender-based violence. An repeatable presence of women in the media will not only shatter glass ceilings, but even challenge age-old gender biases. But the sufficient amount of women as journalists or key figures in media houses is far from achieving. A report published by the UN, Women in 2019, Women in 2019, shows that only 13.6% to 20.9% and 26.3% women in India were found in leadership positions in magazines, TV channels, and digital portals, respectively. Even today, we are familiar with certain household brands. I'm talking about the advertisement part in the digital platform, and often we are accustomed to see women as the bathroom cleaners, as if this is the only role the woman has to play in the household chores. So, the woman engaging in the dialogue with the brand representative and a section of advertisement has also challenged this gendered notion. When a detergent powder advertisement ran the campaign of share the load inverted commas, share the load, quote unquote, by establishing the idea that codes are gender neutral. However, in 2019, the Advertisement Standard Authority of UK has banned harmful gender stereotyping in advertisements. This is a good signal, of course. Then coming to the segment of musical videos or videos of popular music, the woman is agreeing to man's proposal. It seems to be a stereotype feature that the woman is agreeing to a man's proposal only after he has fulfilled her high-end materialistic demands. This is construction of the woman's image, which is made in alliance with the popular idea of women as eternal gold diggers. The notion of a self-empowered woman is perhaps alien to them. This not only forms a negative perception of women, but also reinforces existing prejudices. Blatant objectification of women's bodies in both music videos and the movies, it has been amplified with time. The camera focuses less on a face and more on various parts of her body. This is really pathetic. Such misogynist and sexist representation of women not only subjugates a woman's position in society, but also it's linked to the rise in violence against women. The Global Media Monitoring Project 2015 takes a stock of presence of women in media in every 5 years, found that only 27% of the top management jobs in media companies are occupied by women across 114 countries only. The gender pay gap is quite evident from the data, as women lose out to top management positions to men who go on to earn more. At home, in this country also, a 2019 survey says that the salary index of the gender pay gap in India stands at 19%, where men earn rupees 46.19% more in comparison to women. Now, Ernest Hemingway once sent a cable to his wife, "Are you a war correspondent or wife in my bed?" His wife was the trailblazing Martha Gellhorn, one of the first female war correspondents, who left him to cover the Italian campaign and in the Second World War during the time of Second World War, 1943. 70 years later, sexist attitude towards women has invaded their workplace through streams of gender discrimination, misogyny, and most devastatingly, as sexual harassment. In the years like 2013 and 14, global study found that 48% of female journalists they have experienced some form of sexual harassment in their job, and that 83% rather said that they didn't report to the incident. As the Me Too movement, we are all aware of the Me Too movement, have the wave has brought into light the sexual harassment in workplaces. A 2020 survey conducted by the Network of Women in Media, India and Gender at Work found that over 1,000 respondents had experienced some form of sexual harassment at their workplaces, and over half of them did not report to the incident. While the gender gap remains a concern in the offline world, online platforms like recent times we have known that YouTube showing potential to close that gap. In 2000, it was a very good time, a very good listening time. Thank you all of you.
Thank
We
you, madam.
convey our grateful thanks to our principal, Madam Dr. Mohua Das, for her illuminating speech, and we are immensely enriched by her inspiring introductory speech.
Thank you so much.
Yesterday's session raised so many questions to the academicians, researchers, professionals, and activists. We are looking forward for today's session. The women say that world is more equal than ever. They say inequality is a thing of the past. They perpetuate that struggle for equality has been met with roaring applause. But like most of the things, they say the perpetuated perception is also wrong. The discussion today is about, rather ironically, the inequality amongst genders in a sector which some would argue is the most seen and consumed proponent of equality and social justice. We all are part of it. Some of us work within this industry, some don't, but we all are affected by it. According to the report in 2015 by Global Media Monitoring Project, women made up a mere 90% of the experts in news stories and 37% of the reporters telling stories globally. A UN women-funded research spanning more than 100 countries found that more than 46 news stories perpetuate gender stereotypes, whereas only 6% promoted gender equality. Men still occupy 73 of top management positions across media conglomerates. Study spanning 522 news organizations, the researchers found that despite women being half of the world's population, less than 1/3 of all speaking characters in the film are female. Not all in ominous though. Slowly but steadily, awareness is growing. BBC's 50-50 project is such an exemplary example. This brings me to my closing remarks. Let us use the opportunity to introspect our history as an industry, interpret the generation of girls as well as boys to make the world of media a more equal, inclusive, and just place. This is the real scenario. And today's webinar will throw light on the topic. Now I invite Dr. Madhumita De, Joint Convener, Seminar Committee, IQAC, to introduce our keynote speaker of the day, Professor Jayashree Jethwane.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second day of the two-day international seminar on women and media, the changing narratives and identities, organized by the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication in collaboration with IQSC Women's College, Calcutta. We are extremely honored to have with us today Dr. Jayashree Jethwani, Senior ICSSR Research Fellow, ISID, India.
Environment, or when it comes to promotions, women do face disparity. Here are two examples some of you would even remember. Kiran, and both of them I know they're friends. Kiran Bedi was denied the top position in the police, and what did she do? She took a premature retirement, and of course, after joining a political party, these days she is now governor in Puducherry. The other person which comes to mind is Miss Veena Sikri, a first-class diplomat. She is an ambassador to many, countries. So she was denied foreign secretaryship when she had about 2 years to retire. And what should she do? She also took premature retirement without questioning it. So my question is, or my rather observation is that even women who are so evolved time bulletins, at least until the last 1 month or so. Now, of course, it is Sushant Singh and the drugs and so on and so forth. But you find that hardly there are many scientists who are working on this. There are many doctors who are good enough to talk about it. There are many politicians who could be invited. But very rarely you find women find their place even in the media discussions, as if they don't exist at all. And now about the research. The gentleman who gave the initial remarks, he talked about the disparity of women in the media. So media, when we look at media per se, the mass media, the newspapers, the television, it's not more than 150 years old. But despite being so young, I've said young because when you see the other age-old institutions like politics, families, religion, they're thousands of years old. They are as old as the human civilization. But in this last 150 years, 200 years, it has become so powerful. It has so much clout that it is able to question age-old institutions. And the power that media has is not inherent, which you must say, it is the power which comes from the audiences. It is the power which comes from the eyeballs. And media has the power to influence public opinion, change perceptions, make opinions where they don't exist. You've been seeing in the media day in and day out. So what stops media not being a trendsetter in diversity, in, at least of, allowing a gender-sensitive environment? So the research which I took up this time as part of my fellowship was it's not really on gender per se, it's a subset of that research. I thought last year I did on the commercial space, advertising and promotional media. This time I've taken it on the news media. Wages and related issues is a critical appraisal of a lot of things happen. If you look at the media, ecosystem, there are more than 3 lakh newspaper people, working journalists and other people who work in the media. But 90 to 95% of them get as low a salary as probably, an unskilled labor, especially in the Mufsil towns and the villages and the towns. It's only that about 5% people who are celebrity journalists who might be getting in crores. So my idea was to look at the various wage boards, look at, why they have been denied. But some of you who have been, looking at the trend, what is trending, you have been looking at the way the parliament is passing the laws these days in the monsoon session. 3 labor laws have already been passed, which also subsume the Working Journalists Act into the labor laws. So which means the whole media industry becomes part of the organized and unorganized labor sector, which comprise about 50 crore people. What is going to be the operational part, we'll get to know in a few months' time, but then it has made many things redundant. So the part of my research was to look at the gender perspective in the wage issues, and my research is ongoing. So what I'm going to present today is the insights, the findings which I have had until now, and also based on the secondary data. So we can start with the presentation from your end. Yeah.
Sure. प्रकाश, आप शुरू कर दीजिए presentation.
Is he able to do? Or I can do it from here. Yeah, great. You can put it on the notes, yeah? All right. As you know, the theme of your seminar is new identities and new narratives. So I'd like to leave it to you to see whether we have been able to create new identities, or is the narrative really, really new for women? Because you see, at the end of the day, there's a lot which needs to be done. So, okay, let me have the second slide, please. Can we have the second slide, please? Okay. Now, what I'm trying to tell you is it's not just in India. Even societies which are evolved, even in America, even in Europe, elsewhere, South Asia. In the last research which we did, I had handled the commercial side of the newspapers and the other media. The other institute where I worked for 25 years, in the Institute of Mass Communication, they had looked at the journalism side of the issue, and this research was in all the 9 countries of South Asia, which also included going to some of these countries to kickstart research in those countries. So I'm going to include some of the slides from that research also. So you find that news media organizations across globe have been increasingly criticized for allowing in general a gender-insensitive environment, but also discriminating against women with equal or more qualification experience than their male colleagues in terms of wage parity and choice of peace. One thing is very interesting, which I got to know while I was doing research, and I'm doing a lot of interpersonal interviews, in-depth interviews, and talking to people as high as editors and as in lower echelon and who are just reporters. So one thing very interesting I found, which was very dismaying though, that the entire media, as you know, 99.9% is in the private sector, and most of it is now in the hands of the big conglomerates. But interestingly, one person does not know what the other person getting in terms of wages. It's a closely guarded secret within the media houses also. There are no, of course, there would be some various kinds of, echelons for which some pay scales would be there. But at the end of the day, how much one gets, the one person does not know from the other. It's not just between men and women, even among the colleagues, is taken as a very closely guarded secret. There was one interesting research which I found in the public domain, that one of the largest newspaper conglomerate is said that about 5% of its people get about 40% of the salary, the amount which is set aside for salary. The rest of them, about 95%, get about 60% salary. The people on the 5%, they go with even a salary as high as 5 crores in a year. So that is the kind of disparity between the haves and the have-nots, the people who are in the higher echelons. A very interesting book which I've been reading these days, Journalism in the Era of Post-Truth, in which Mr. Raman, who had been a journalist for years, almost 30, 40 years, who worked in mainstream newspapers, he's writing that someone who gets a salary as nasty as 4 to 5 crores in a year obviously does not do it for his, editorial, scholarship, but what he would be doing for the the proprietors, what you would be doing for the people who own media vis-a-vis the powers that be. So that is what the situation is. Next, please. Can I have the next slide, please? Hello?
Prakash, next slide, please.
Am I audible to him?
He has changed.
Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
he
Yes,
has
ma'am.
changed
Okay,
it.
okay. Now, when you look at the digital media, the augmentation of digital media, especially the social media platforms, have seen a steep rise in misogyny, hate mongering, and abusive trolls among many women journalists who cover heartbeat, especially politics, other critical areas of reporting. Now, you find that some of the research studies which I have studied, which are part of this research, I'll come to that little later. But you find if you are covering, women generally get fashion, culture, history, etc., the soft beats as it is called. But if you're on a heartbeat, if you're covering politics, if you're covering a corporate sector, if you're covering, critical sectors which might, when you write something which might hurt the interests of others, so you are on the hit list of those people. It's not only women, but also men. So you find that some of our, topmost women journalists, they are trolled. I have a few slides I'm going to show to you. There are some people who have started tracking the trolling of these women, and it is horrendous to see how men can use the kind of language. I have not added that, but I'll invite you to I'll let you know where to go to find the entire research. It is absolutely unnerving to find how women are treated and what kind of mental space or mental rest they would have. Many of them would leave the job, or some of them who are almost, I would say, a dying species. They're still there, and there's no suo motu cognizance taken by all the women commissions we have, all the ministries we have. They just turn Nelson's eye to their sufferings. Next, please. Can I have the next, please? I think Prakash is not in my on
No,
my
no,
radar.
ma'am. He has changed. It's only because the internet connection, ma'am. So maybe 2-3 seconds delay.
All
Yes,
right.
we can see it. Yeah.
All right. All right. So missing laws against the miscreants. In fact, social media or the WW World Wide Web is probably the least regulated of phenomenon even in 21st century. No country has any specific policy to address the menace. The UN General Assembly, however, took a note of it in 2017, has exhorted its member nations to make policies in this regard. But I don't think, except for Finland, I'll talk about that a little later, not anybody has taken any action in this regard. Next, please. Choice of bees. Like any other industry, one has seen a surge in women's employment in the media industry also. That carefully, women may be visible, but not necessarily in substantive editorial positions, decision-making positions, or in heartbeats when compared with their male colleagues. More and more women are assigned soft beats like culture, education, fashion. Very few are seen covering politics, economy, international relations, wars, and insurgency. Those who cover, they don't have a very, peaceful time. Next, please. Missing women in the media discourse. Not many women are invited as panelists in news channel discussions, as the news media by and large remains a male bastion. When we look at the extent of space women get in the content, there's a huge misrepresentation, underrepresentation, first of all, inappropriate portrayal in both regional and mainstream media discourse. Let me just take you to the current obsession with some of these channels, the drug menace, and the Sushant Singh Rajput. So there are women involved. You would have seen. It's not just. I mean, there's an allegation that some of these women might be taking drugs, but there's not a single name of a man as of now. It was only women for so long. While they're talking about these women, you would have seen our TV screen is divided into a number of windows, and the middle window would have different, scenes of that women. She might be, it could be from a film, it could be from her photo shoot, and they would show the generally, that they are scantily dressed, they are modern, they are upbeat, while they're in order just to, at least I think so, that when they're talking about women who are taking drugs or who are taking on the government, so they are not, the perception is being created that these women may not necessarily be innocent. She might be essaying a role in a film, or it might be just a shoot, but a continuous, play of those pictures is in a mainstream and almost all mainstream news channels. I'd like you to take your own, own decision why it would be, why it would not be. Next, please. Me Too movement, the media office spaces can be fertile ground for gender-based violence. The Me Too movement that rocked the media industry, including the news media sector in 2018, tells in no uncertain terms that there's more than meets the eye. Despite laws, women continue to suffer gender-based stereotypes and sexual violence at workplace. And we know the celebrated journalist who was a minister at the time when there was a complaint, and what did he do? He just went and filed a suit against one of the journalists. And in India probably is the highly regulated country, but when it comes to operation, the cases take so long. And unfortunately, the onus of proving that you are not guilty or you are the victim rests on the victim. And this man said it in the court that he denies all. Everybody knew what the fact was, but not many people came as witnesses, and the case is still there. And that's why you find, there are not many, complaints against such misdemeanor at workplace. Next, please. Journalism as a profession fraught with lack of security. Pursuing journalism is not like any other job. Journalists in general face threat to their personal life from those who feel harmed by their writing. Many studies suggest that journalists covering politics, insurgency, and corruption have faced more threat to their life or have lost their lives in the line of the duty than those covering other beats. Women reporters who cover these beats often find themselves at a double disadvantage, being reporters and women, when they take on a public role, reporting on issues and events that fall in the male bastion. They face a huge kind of misogyny and also hate mongering. Next, please. Sexual harassment, the bane of news media industry, empirical data from various studies. So for this study, I had to do a lot of secondary, work, data analysis, and find that this problem is almost universal. So almost half of the women journalists around the world say they experience sexual harassment at workplace, as per the International Women's Media Foundation, IWMF's global report. In fact, I'm also a member of that. And now recently there was a very interesting panel discussion on how, women, celebrity women or women who want to make a place for themselves in politics, how are they covered? So they've taken upon themselves now Kamala Harris, who is a vice presidential candidate. So I'm sure there was a panel discussion on that how media is going to cover Kamala Harris in the ensuing presidential contest, vice presidential contest. So abetted by technology, women journalists now face online attacks, especially trolling. This may result in women reporters, with some exception, after either leaving their jobs or declining to take up challenging assignments. In order to address this issue, the IWMF has financially, commissioned an NGO that works to track digital harassment of women journalists. And anybody, some of you as students, some of you as faculty members can also become members of, who are researching into gender and media, can become members of IWMF. Next, please. Breaking the cycle of silence. The international media support IMS, an independent group working for the rights and safety of women journalists based out of Denmark. In a report, The Safety of Women Journalists, Breaking the Cycle of Silence and Violence, an overview of countries has addressed the issue. In fact, when we were doing the research last year for UNESCO and SWAN, so IMS had supported my visit to Myanmar, Burma last year in November, December. And interestingly, I like to tell you that probably out of all the South Asian countries, Burma, Myanmar is the only country which has more women journalists, more women working in advertising than men. Almost 60%. Nobody was believing when we looked at the data, but then again and again, we just tried to corroborate the data and found that Myanmar indeed, the media scene is very gendered. So the report was commissioned by IMS to assess the question of how women in media are being targeted and how journalism has impacted the gender-specific harassment and violence. The study aimed to inform, debate, and take stock of actions by media owners and editors, policymakers, press freedom organizations, and journalists. There are a few insights which I'll just share with you in the coming slides. Next, please. So physical security. Women journalists are more often targets of sexual violence than male journalists. Verbal threats and abuse, particularly online. Women journalists are subject to particularly damaging brand of editorial that includes high volume, explicit threats of sexual violence, personal insults, and circulation of private information or demeaning images. Sexual harassment at workplace and social inequality. Gender inequality is entrenched within the media sector and societies and manifested in unequal pay, low number of women being able to advance in decision-making levels, and a tolerance or lack of protocols when it comes to sexual harassment by colleagues, sources, or interviewees, social pressure against women joining professional ranks or family obligations. In fact, when I was at IMC, I was the chairman of the Internal Complaints Committee. As you all would know, the Women College is organizing this, that when you're more than 10 women, you have to have an ICC. But how difficult it is when you're men, when you're boys, girls, it's a co-education college. It was so difficult. I was, ICC chairman for about 3 years. So, getting justice, quote unquote, to the people who are survivors was very difficult. Despite the fact that an ICC has a quasi-judicial kind of a status, but it was very difficult because as ICC, you have to submit your recommendations to the top management, and the top management generally I've seen, not only where I worked, elsewhere also, sits on that till, the person who's a victim, a survivor, takes it, in her own stride and doesn't follow it. Next, please. So this WMF's global report covering 500 media houses across globe. This is probably the largest, the most seminal work undertaken by this foundation. It was a groundbreaking global report on the status of women in news media by International Women's Foundation that evaluated 500 media houses in 60 countries. Some foreseeable facts emerged. Men occupied majority of the management jobs and reporting positions in most countries. 73% men were on the top management compared to 27% women. Among reporters, men occupied 2/3 of the jobs compared to 36% held by women. However, among senior professionals, women were almost near parity in reporting, editing, and writing jobs. Next, please. This is very interesting. India Studies highlights. I pulled it out from that huge report, which is in the public domain. Some of you can read it. So 17 Indian news companies participated in the study, 10 newspapers, 6 television stations, 1 radio station. Together, these companies employed approximately 13,000 people, including 2,405 women, 10,518 men. So that is what really is the ratio between men and women. Women just comprise between 21 to 25%. Men outnumber women in these 4-to-1 ratio. Both at governance and top management levels of Indian companies seem to be occupied by few select individuals. In governance, women's participation was approximately 21%, but which denoted the roles of the company board of directors, those probably who were either from the families owning the company, mothers, wives, daughters, daughter-in-laws, rather than their ability to secure these positions through advancement. At the top management level, women representation was exceptionally low with 13.8%. In junior and senior professional levels, women were 25.5% and 28.4% respectively. A support category in which women sometimes dominate in other like sales, finance, and administration sees women holding only 11.4%. But when we looked at the other countries, they were more in the sales promotion and the advertising, but not even in India. They don't even have those positions. Next, please. There's a UNESCO UN Women International Federation of Journalists, IFJ report 2015. I think somebody even quoted that in the initial remarks. The report highlights that although the number of women professionals in media has doubled in the last 2 decades, it's still only 28.6% in Asia and Pacific, and the men to women ratios are dismal 4:1. Next, please. This is the research. I was involved for 2 years. The South Asian Women Network and UNESCO. It highlights the women. This was Women for Change Towards Building a Gendered Media in South Asia. This was the title of our research. Now you look at the table. Afghanistan has 10% women. Bangladesh has 32%. Bhutan has 28%. India has 21.7%. Maldives is 5%. Myanmar is 25% journalism, but all put together, this was news, was about 60%. Nepal is 12.3%, Pakistan is 10%, and Sri Lanka is 15%. So the entire scene is, if you look at the entire Southeast Asia, it's not so good. And interestingly, when we when our colleagues from Afghanistan came and we had a number of workshops held in Delhi at ISID where I work, so they find a huge tirade from the Taliban also. So they brought some pictures. Women, if they appear in advertising on the billboards or the hoardings, so we were witness to those defiled hoardings. You know, mud was thrown on the faces of the women who appeared in hoardings. So this is the kind of misogyny and the kind of hate mongering against women in traditional societies, and many women journalists have faced in Afghanistan, a threat to their life. Their places have been bombarded, but despite that, you find there are a lot of very courageous women who have been able to put their point across what is happening in the media scene, thanks to because social media has the pros and the cons. But you look at the pros. Just by, with your own mobile phone, you can reach out, you can upload videos, you can put your point across. And we found that what is happening in Afghanistan in the last couple of years, especially, there was a lot of problem which the media was facing there. Next, please. When you look at the low job security for women in media in South Asia, you find that Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Myanmar, Pakistan has a problem. It's only Nepal and Sri Lanka which is non-discriminatory. The rest is discriminatory. Yeah, next please. The other disturbing findings include all 9 countries in general reported socio-cultural barriers for women in media, low job security, sexist environment, and in some countries like Afghanistan, threat from the Taliban. Except for Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, all other countries reported a near absence of gender discourse in the course curricula of journalism. India has over 300 universities and institutes of higher learning teaching journalism and mass communication, but in general, most syllabi are devoid of gender modules. In fact, this is where gender mainstreaming is required. In our policy paper, which we submitted to the government, we suggested that the universities have, in case the people who are from journalism stream, they may not be gender expert because that's not really taught and at the mass comm schools where they graduate or they do a PhD from. But almost every university has sociology department, social work department. So we suggested that you can pull out the faculty from there, because if you look at the syllabus of the sociology department, the course curricula, you find they generally have a paper on sociology, on gender and media. But when you look at the course curricula of journalism and other mass communication disciplines, you do not have a course like that. So we have suggested the government that without incurring any extra cost in having the faculty, why don't you have a cross departmental, kind of arrangement where the people from the media can teach in sociology, the people from sociology can teach in the media departments. I hope the UGC or the HR ministry takes some call on that. Next, please. Media Studies Group Report. This is very interesting. A year-long study by Delhi-based Media Studies Group released in 2012 reiterates the findings of many of the studies on the dismal state of women journalists. Getting data via the Right to Information Act, 14,278 accredited journalists across 255 districts, 28 states representing 40% of country's total districts. They found women journalists only represented 2.7% of journalists at district level, while 6 states and 2 union territories had no women journalists at the district level. Surprisingly, the national media did not perform better than districts where women journalist accreditation is just around 15%. In fact, it's very interesting. If you, it's in the public domain. In all, I think there are about 2,600 odd accredited journalists at the central level, which cover Delhi and NCR. The states have their own accreditation policies, and you find that just about 250 women or so who are accredited. But recently I found something interesting in 2018. If you're an accredited journalist, it opens the doorways for you for a lot of freebies and lot of government welfare measures, which came to me as a big surprise, because before that I was not really looking into this area. Now that this area of my research, you find both the center and states put together, there's so many welfare measures. Some of the states even have pension for journalists who retire. Assam has just started. If you look at Andhra Pradesh, you find that if people get the one-time distress amount, and the children get as big an amount as 5 lakhs for higher education if he's going abroad. So all put together, it runs into crores of rupees, but it's not in the public domain per se. It's, quid pro quo. On the one hand, the media thinks that, taking, all these freebies and largies from the government disturbs their watchdog function. And the media proprietors, you find that when the wage boards were being set up by the government, they had a problem. They thought this was interference in the free speech and expression because the government was trying to gag them, but they do not tell the journalists not to take it. Do you know that many states, including center, has government bungalows for the journalists? They run into hundreds, and but I really do not know what's going to happen when this Working Journalists Act has already got subsumed in labor laws. But it's very difficult to withdraw the largesse once you have. But the point I'm making here is that, are really women also partaking these welfare measures? Some of these states have the list of journalists who have been given welfare measures, who have been given cash amount, the medical facilities. At least in some of the states, when I went to those sites, I did not find many names of the women journalists. So what it means, which means, as at least I can infer, that women, my research study also tells, and the research also tells us that women really do not know about their own welfare measures within their own media houses. So they don't really bother what is their right. They do not even ask for that. So it's high time that the women, whatever number they are, if they join together and ask for their rightful, measures which they should have. But I just found in the public domain that the government of India, the central government, has now decided that 33% houses in the central, from the central quota, they have about 120, I think, odd houses. Big Bangalore and Luton's Delhi would go to the women journalists. But I really do not know, once you are a journalist, you remain a journalist after your retirement, you become a freelance journalist, and you can still have the Bangalows. But now the latest is that you can retain it for about 5 years. So women have to know their rights. Next, please. This was very interesting research which was undertaken in the early part of the current century, I think 2004 or so. It was the National Commission for Women-Sponsored Research. So some of the very interesting data is that more than 20% respondents said that women were discriminated against in promotions. Another 46% said that this was because of their gender, because of their sex, while some felt it was because of their age. The data suggested that more than 8% women journalists were forced to leave their jobs due to discrimination in promotion. About 38% respondents shared that having children carried a misperception that women would not be able to work late hours. Similarly, over 29% felt that having children impacted their promotion. Okay, next, please. About 23% respondents said that they had faced sexist remarks or gestures and sexual harassment at their workplace, and imagine even professional associations in which they were members. My current research, I already have about 70 responses with me, which I was just looking at for this webinar. And I found that out of that 70%, 75% people say that they are not members of any trade union or professional association because they don't see much of. But this came to me a surprise that it's okay at workplace. Professional associations are supposed to look after your interest, but even there they find a sexist environment. Of those who faced such ignominy and discomfort, over 31% said that it had seriously undermined their confidence and affected their work. Over 24% said it mildly affected them, but more than 40% said that such issues had no impact on them, which is encouraging because such women did not let their self-esteem and confidence suffer because of gender-insensitive environment at their workplace, but went about with their work. The disturbing feature of this study was that a majority of women respondents were not aware of the policies relating to their jobs and also provisions against sexual harassment at workplace. So it's very important for women also to understand their own rights. Next, please. And please let me know when I have to finish, Surita. So these are some of the studies which I went through. This was very, the short point I want to make is, because I think we're running short of time, is that I'll just go to the last 3-4 slides now. So the short point I'm trying to make is that now this is what I'm talking is 1970 to 90. From 1970 to 2020 is 50 years. Because of this meta research, which I looked at because of my research, current research interest, I don't think much really has changed, inherently in our lives, in the lives of the journalists. Because whatever you might say, there are more women who join the schools of journalism, but they also join. But somewhere, either early on or at the mid-career, they leave the profession of journalism. Part of my research is also talking to those women who were journalists, but they left it. And some of the insights which I can share with you is that it was basically they're not as much worried about wage parity as about the gender insensitive environment. One of the young ladies, she's now in early 40s, but when she worked for about 10 years in media, then she left. Now she is into teaching, a faculty member. The word she used was, ma'am, the atmosphere, if I have to describe in one word, is brutal for women in the media houses. So you can imagine, they said, if you are young, you have to, it is taken as a matter of entitlement the men that they have to give a sexist remark, they have to give a kind of a look which makes you uncomfortable. What kind of beats would you get? What kind of, so these are part and parcel of their everyday discomfort, everyday ignominy which they suffer. But there are some who said, like, I also met somebody who was almost an associate editor, and she just demitted office last year. But what happens is that, again, the generation. So this lady said that, we also were very young when we started. We never had a problem. But the only problem which we faced was a patriarchal kind of an environment. The top boss would say, no, you cannot be there, after 6 o'clock, even if there was a very good story, but they would all tell us to pack up our bags and go back home. And she thinks that the women, society is dynamic, culture is dynamic. We cannot be talking about what was 1970s and 2020. They're different. The girls are different. They're more modern. They're more, outspoken. So she had a problem with that. He said, no, if they have a problem, because you see what is happening. So I'll leave it at that. So can we quickly run a few slides, please? Then I'll tell you where to stop. Next. Okay. Since I'm leaving this with you, some of you can, take this presentation with you. Next, please. I just want to come to the digital media. Okay, next. 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 Okay, this is important. Women journalists face the tirade from misogynists and hate mongers on social media. Women journalists covering heartbeats are trolled, abused, their characters assassinated by virulent discourse, which at times also involves morphing their pictures to present them in a bad light, the ultimate weapon in sick minds of misogynists to disgrace women. One has not seen any women commission or the government taking a suo moto cognizance of this inhuman and criminal campaign against women journalists, the trolling often being on perceived ideological lines. Some brave hearts fight the battle on their own, either by taking the trolls sometimes head on, or at times by ignoring them when it becomes too hard to handle, or by lodging a complaint with the cyber crime cell, but nothing much happens. Next slide. Next, please. Next slide. A 2018 survey by the International Federation of Journalists reflected that 64% women reporters experience online abuses. The online harassment takes various forms, the report says, including death or rape threats, insults, devaluation of their work, sexist comments, being sent obscene images, cyberbullying, cyber stalking, and account impersonation. Of the women who face online harassment, 47% did not report the abuse. If they did, it was done only internally to their management, said 40% of respondents. The fallout of these attacks had its impact on the victims. 63% said the attacks had psychological effects. 38% said they went into self-censorship, and 8% lost their jobs. Next, please. This is very interesting. What it is like to get trolled all day long. There's a study on trolls by Harry Stevens and Piyush Agarwal in 2017, which I went through painstakingly, the entire, like you also to see, is in the public domain. Conducted in April 2017, the abuses and expressions were categorized under the following themes: violent, sexual, racial, religious, political, and other. Trolls against 4 women journalists, including Barkha Dutt, Tavleen Singh, Madhu Kishore, and Rana Ayub, were tracked for a week and compiled for a day that had maximum trolls. Next, please. To say the least, the outcome is demeaning, insulting, and outright criminal against women, at least against 2 of these feisty women journalists, Barkha Dutt and Rana Ayub. The terms often included prostitute, terrorist, anti-national, Pakistani in a pejorative sense, and mulli for Ayub. Now, prostitute, who is the person who invented, quote unquote, this word? I don't need to tell you, you all know that. So a man is not called a prostitute, but a woman is called, and you know why. Next. Discussion. The many research studies on the state of women journalists in various countries, including India, make it clear that gender equity and gender sensitive environment within the workplace and overall ecosystem is still a far cry. The social media probably has done the utmost damage to women journalists who, by and large, seem to be fighting lone battles, internet, social media, is the least regulated medium. Next, please. In spite of many women commission a law against sexual harassment for women, there's no suo motu cognizance by these bodies. These journalists who are in watchdog function, working in extremely challenging environment, deserve protection from misogynists and hate mongers who often hide behind the anonymity of trolls. Next, please. Another point worth debating is the different treatment meted out to males vis-a-vis female journalists when the writing hurts the powerful and the supporters who stalk and troll such writers. When a male journalist offends them, he at best would be called names for being ambitious or to be hurled with certain expletives, to be toying a certain ideology. But for women, it's always character assassination. When a man is abused, the very abuses end up being disrespectful only to women. Next, please. There probably is no country in the entire world that has adopted any specific provisions for protection of journalists from online harassment. Recognizing the threats, as I told you in the beginning, General Assembly has said, UN General Assembly has said it. Next, please. In Finland, the media industry joined to create a journalist support fund to counter online harassment. The fund is yet to get active as of September 2019. Besides, the Union of Journalists of Finland has issued a guide for active journalists with advice on what to do if they are target of hate campaign. At the same time, this called upon the journalists to return to fact-based journalism. Next, please. The initial idea of internet meant information liberalism that was led by a vision of network computing as a public property that served the general interest. All this, however, changed too soon. Now, a large part of the web is dominated by few leading players, almost all of them based out of US, who have consolidated their dominance over the last decade or so. The issue of cultural diversity and plurality of voices is the current digital and global environment are raising new challenges beyond those already identified in the context of migration from classical media to the internet galaxy. Next, please. GAFAM, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, Microsoft dominate the digital market, making them not only the most valued companies, but also one who control the information flow. The social media proprietors cannot get away from the responsibility of addressing the issue of hatred, misogyny, and trolling against women journalists. Complaints by some Indian women journalists to social media platform owners met with indifference and no response. This is so sad. Next, please. Should be the last. Many women journalists leave the profession due to insensitive work environment and unsupportive ecosystem. The spirited women journalists who continue to work and express their opinion on issues, institutions, powerful people are now an endangered species in the media world. They need all the support from society and policymakers, and the perpetrators of indecent trolls deserve the strictest punitive commission. All the stakeholders from media and government need to work on this to bring about policy in this regard. I rest my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It was very engrossing. Actually, I lost the track of time when listening to you.
So did I. You know, teachers are compulsive speakers. We all are.
So there, your discussion has triggered discussion actually in the chat box, and we have few questions also.
Yes.
Would you like to take maybe a few questions?
Yes.
So how do you want to go about it? Should I read it out for you, or you want to?
Please do that.
Okay, okay. So one of the early questions is from Roshmiti. Can you mute yourself?
Yes.
Hi. Yeah.
Okay. So the one of the early questions we have got from Punnarupa Bhaduri is the question: in this gender stereotyped society, how to tackle the underrepresentation of women in the media houses?
Great. Very difficult, but it's challenging, but not impossible. Now, when you talk about media's definition has expanded now. If the mainstream media is not giving you space, as I said in the beginning, the social media has both pros and cons. You have a voice. And, you know, generally we used to say that media are the opinion makers in the society. There are a lot of you know, anonymous opinion makers on the social media now. So women, there's a lot of responsibility on the part of the researchers, academics, and the students to continue this dialogue. Have your blogs, have a movement on the social media, start writing all the research which you do, put it in the public domain, and one day something is going to happen. It's a very interesting thing. I like to tell you an anecdote. About 25 or 26 years ago, Shankaracharya of Kanchi happened to visit IIT Delhi. And there were a lot of journalists also. So one of the journalists asked him, sir, but why men hate us so much at a workplace? Why there's so much misogyny? Why there's so much of hatred against women who are working? He took a pause and he said, my dear lady, the question you ask, I will not live, you may not live. After about 100 years, this would not even be an academic question. What he meant to say was that somehow these men, because women have got into the public sphere, public jobs in all the last 50, 60 years, at least in India, 70 years, maybe 100 years. So that somehow men have that grudge. They think that only if those women were not there, this job would have been mine. So I say the moment you have 3, 4, 5 generations ahead, this won't be even an academic question. So let me hope that this will not be an academic question 10 years hence. Okay, next.
Yeah, okay. So Shukonda Odhikari, I guess one of our students, yeah, she is asking, many women feel afraid to speak out in workplace harassment in fear of losing job, being stigmatized. How to change that?
Now that you have a law, and if you see, as I said, there are more than 10 women, even in colleges, you have the ICC. You have to be a little bold, and you don't lose a job if you file a complaint against sexual harassment. Nobody can take you out of the job. You must. The one thing that is important is that you must know your rights. You must know the law. Tell me how many women who work know about the law. I'm really ashamed sometimes when I find even the media discourse when women are talking, journalists are talking, they still talk about Vishaka judgment. Now Vishaka judgment is on the back burner. Now you have full-fledged law against sexual harassment, prevention at workplace. And this research which we conducted the last 2 years, we found that in many advertising agencies and media houses, they have ICCs, and they also conduct, POSH Act, a POSH prevention of sexual harassment test among all the people, men and women who work, to see whether they are sensitized about issues. And everybody is handed over a copy of the Sexual Harassment Act. So it's very important for you to understand what the law is, what the protection is. And if we don't come out, if you think that we are going to lose our job, just put the job on the top of your foot, If you lose one job, you get another. But don't be afraid that there's a lot of protection. But as I said that, we are the most regulated country. But when it comes to operation, we are least smart. But then things are changing. Yeah.
A related question by Chanduna Aditya, one of our colleagues, is, do you think being aware about the workplace laws is enough without getting support from colleagues and superiors? How to go about that?
There's a larger ecosystem and there's a smaller ecosystem. It's very important for you to create a space wherever you work. It's not just a media place, wherever you work. We create a space for ourselves. And because when you talk about an organization, it's not a monolith. It looks like one, but then there are a lot of groups within groups within groups. And as per law of sexual harassment at workplace, the people who are in charge of handling it, they're supposed to sensitize both men and women. Is mandatory. A few times in a year, conduct workshops. We did it at IMC. We invited jurists, we invited attorneys, we invited social, activists like Kamala Bhasin and all. And and we held workshops on, like sometimes women even may not know what really comprises sexual harassment. Even somebody passing a comment which you're not interested to take it could be a social harassment. It's not just physical. Somebody, it is. You must understand the law, and don't be afraid when you're educated, you are in a job, you make a place for yourself. It takes time, but you can, and we all have done it. We all have done it. It's not that when we started working, things were easy for us.
Maybe two last questions. The panel is there next.
Yes, now you have it.
There's two more questions,
Hi,
ma'am.
Ujjwala. Hi, Ujjwala Babu. Hi, Padmini. I find Padmini also here.
Hi, Jayashree ma'am. So nice to hear you.
So nice
It was
to
a fantastic.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. It was a charm listening to
Okay.
you.
Maybe next time when we have another webinar, I'll have a full research I'd like to share with you.
This was really
Thanks, Surita.
What two last questions, ma'am? Just two last questions. One is from Sudeshna Ghosh. Many times, gender hierarchy is maintained by women only. How to address that?
True. We live in a patriarchal society and we don't even realize we raise our boys differently, we raise our men differently. As I said in the beginning, we even have a kind of a discourse like "Main chup rahungi," Meena Kumari. "Main bolungi nahi." So yesterday, Kai was talking about the silence, the scarcity of silence. Who would know more than we do? But in the way we are conditioned in our households, that you're a woman, you can't speak loud. This is what we tell our girls also. "Zyada जोर से मत बोलो, लड़कियों को नहीं अच्छा लगता." So maybe the women also have to, especially the younger you are, when you marry, how are you going to raise your children? I think the responsibility rests with you, but it must change.
One last question is it's actually we are live streaming in YouTube. So one question from the YouTube: how can academic modules on gender help to break the stereotypes media are creating?
How gender?
How can academic modules in the syllabus, gender modules on the syllabus, can help to break the stereotypes that media are creating?
Wonderful. Because, how do you start? I mean, this is the discourse we always have had in our academia, that you have to start from the beginning. The gender mainstreaming has to be done at the school and college level, media schools. So if we can make our course curricula gender sensitive, you can make them, these are the people who go out and become journalists. So the responsibility rests with us. And when you have those gender, mainstreamed modules on the YouTube, and nowadays you find now people don't really read books. YouTube has a huge role to play because they are the conduits now between the academia and the students. The more modules they have on this, the more, at least I expect, more sensitivity we can expect, and at least people will have the ability for critical thinking, which we do not have much at the school college level. So these modules, I'm sure when you have people who are gender experts, who are media experts, in case they can, mainstream gender dialogue, it is going to impact, might take some time, but YouTube has a great role to play in that.
We are keeping our fingers crossed, ma'am. So with this, I am calling one of my colleagues, Tamosha, to officially end the keynote address panel and welcome the next plenary session. Thanks a lot, Jayashree.
Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tamusha Ghosh, Faculty Journalism and Mass Communication. First of all, thank you so much for presenting such an engaging and enlightening session, ma'am. It was wonderful to have you here with us today. We are really grateful to you for your gracious presence. We wish we could hear you more. You have touched upon very important facets on gender discrimination at workplace and wage disparity in the field of journalism. You talked about the state of women in India and also how they are represented in the media. You mentioned about the digital media menace for women. These are extremely relevant issues in today's time when women are nowhere behind men. We're thankful to you for giving us your valuable time and sharing your thoughts with us. You've given us new areas to ponder. Like you rightly mentioned, ma'am, research doesn't solve a problem, it finds a problem, and gender equality is still a far cry. We hope eventually things will get better. But for now, I, on behalf of Women's College Calcutta, would like to extend our sincere gratitude to you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I enjoyed as much. It's a small world. We'll meet again. Kusum Fabina. Thank you so much.
Thanks, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. I'll continue.
I would now like to begin today's plenary. I would like to introduce the chair of plenary, Dr. Ujjwala Barve. Dr. Barve is the head of department, Communication and Journalism, Savitri Phule, Pune University. She has worked in a Marathi newspaper, Maharashtra, before joining All India Radio, New Delhi, to work first as a news reader and later as an assistant news editor. She was associated with All India Radio, Pune. She made a foray into television journalism with a local video daily, Pune Varta. She has also anchored a popular weekly current affairs discussion program on Doordarshan. Her doctoral research was about accuracy of language used in Marathi radio and television bulletins. She teaches language skills, radio journalism, media research, and advertising. Her research areas are media communication, media education, diaspora media, etc. She has presented research papers in national and international conferences. She has also translated many books from English into Marathi, including Indian Media Business by Vinita Khandekar. We have with us today in the panel women researchers from across India and UK who are researching on women in media. We have with us Dr. Clara Sedgwick, an honorary research fellow at the University of Nottingham. Her book, Feminist Media from the Second Wave to the Digital Age, will be published this year by Roman and Littlefield International. She also does stand-up comedies. She will be talking about feminist media online in the UK and in the US. We also have with us Dr. Monisha Kadri from Islamic University of Science and Technology, Kashmir. Besides being a media educator, she is also a writer and a filmmaker. Dr. Kadri was selected as a Commonwealth Professional Fellow in 2019. She will be discussing about looking at the news media narratives and the idea of gender justice. We also have with us Dr. K.S. Kritika. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Visual Communication in the Pondicherry University Community College. With over 17 years of teaching experience, her research interests are in the areas of ICT and women empowerment. She has also completed a major research project on digital sustainability among rural women funded by UGC. She will share her views on issues in digital sustainability among rural women of India. We have with us Ms. Padmini Jain, an assistant professor at the School of Journalism and New Media Studies, IGNU. She specializes in advertising and online media. With more than a decade of experience in postgraduate teaching, she has also developed several video modules for NCERT. She will take us through changing narratives in Indian popular media. Thank you all of you for joining us. Over to you, Ujwala ma'am.
Hello everyone, a very good evening to you and a fantastic start to today's session. And Jayashri Jethwani has set the right tone when we need to discuss women and media. And I have a wonderful panel here. I'm sure they also will provide great insights about the topic that we have decided for the conference. So keeping
Ujjwala, we have been mute. You have to switch it on.
I'm so sorry, I just took half a minute of it. Yeah. So I will not speak for long at this juncture. And I would like to welcome the panelists. And I look forward to hearing to them. And we will start this way that each panelist will get around 10 minutes or so for presentation. And then it will be followed by question answers. Instead of taking questions immediately after the presentation, we will take all the questions together because some questions might be common. But in case you have a question specifically for a particular speaker, please mention the speaker's name in the chat box, and then we will take all those questions. So we will start with Claire. Are you ready, Claire? Yeah.
Yes, I'm ready. I'm just going to get my presentation up.
Yes, sure. Please go ahead.
Okay. Can you all see the presentation?
Not yet, but maybe we'll see soon. Yeah. Now we can see it.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yes, Claire. Yes, sir.
Great. Great. I'll start then. So good afternoon, everyone. And first of all, I'd like to say a thank you to the organisers for inviting me today. And this is a really exciting opportunity to present my research to a wide audience. so that's great. So what I'm going to do today is just spend the next 10 minutes or so going through some research just based off my new book, and talking about the present and online feminist media. I'm going to start with a historical kind of context, because one of my main arguments in the book is that often we talk about kind of contemporary media and don't necessarily think about how the historical kind of context that influences the ability for kind of feminist media to operate. So I'll just a bit of background, then I'll move on to look at more contemporary examples towards the end. So the key thing that came out of the book, so the book looks at feminist media from the 70s up until the present day. I found that key themes came out of the book, regardless of what kind of time we were looking at, regardless of whether I was looking at examples from the 70s, examples from the kind of 2020s. I found that these key themes came. So one was that there was a lot of entanglements between feminism and capitalism. So my looks predominantly at kind of US and UK context, and that really has an impact on the need for feminist media to exist and operate. Also, perhaps a bit of impact on the kind of feminist media that we see within those societies. And the second was feminism and intersectionality. So obviously Kimberly Crenshaw's influential, but what I found is this was something that was being discussed in my earlier kind of case studies from the 70s and 80s, and it's definitely something that is still being discussed today. And I think when we look at feminist media, what we also need to be in the US context is who gets to be the media, who gets to write kind of feminist media. Obviously the previous keynote kind of talks about that quite a lot in terms of gender, but I would also argue that especially in kind of Western contexts, what we have tended to find is that it tends to predominantly be white middle class women that become the kind of feminist voices that we see within the media. And we might want to question who gets left out of those conversations, and how we can make a media that is more inclusive to all women and all feminists, and not just those with kind of privilege. So why feminist media? So the reason that I decided to look at feminist media is partly because in the 70s and 80s in particular, when I first started doing this, when the area I was first looking at, there was very little in the way of feminist media in the mainstream. So Chambers et al. Talk about publications such as Off Our Backs and Ms. Magazine in the US and Spare Rib in Britain, and how they demonstrate that radical feminist newspapers and magazines within independent publishing were themselves important contributions to women's reshaping of women's news. And although I think that has changed a little bit, so we have this kind of what Bene Weiser calls popular feminism, where we see feminist ideas kind of coming within the mainstream. Even within that, we still see a massive imbalance in terms of who gets to kind of write the media and whose kind of stories get told. So the Global Media Monitoring Project, they're kind of Who Makes the News project, kind of looks at those imbalances and shows that actually what we see is that kind of women are massively underrepresented within the news and within the media more broadly. So this is still an ongoing issue, even if we have a more popular feminism circulating within kind of societies. So the first key thing that I looked at was feminist media and capitalism. This image here that you can all see, this is actually from the Ladies' Home Journal sit-in in 1970. Now the Ladies' Home Journal was a magazine in the US. It was a women's magazine, but it was edited by a man, and people thought that actually that wasn't something that that they wanted to see. So a group of feminists basically occupied the editor's office and said that their demand was that they wanted an issue of the magazine that looked at the women's liberation movement. And that in itself was quite interesting, because that's an attempt to kind of infiltrate a mainstream media platform. But what interested me in particular was one of the things that came out of this is a lot of feminists accused other feminists of kind of trying to capitalize on the sit-in to kind of develop their own journalistic careers. So we can already see this kind of interplay between capitalism and feminism, which I think still exists today. Ms. Magazine, which was the US magazine that I looked at in my research, they had advertising, and often were advertising for products that feminists were directly critiquing, so things like makeup and fashion, that kind of reinforce beauty standards, and kind of slimming pills that reinforce kind of a specific body image. But they need to do that to keep the magazine going. Alternatively, Spare Rib, another magazine that I looked at, which was UK based, they had the opposite problem. They didn't want to go down that route of having lots of advertising from specific kind of multinational companies, but they found that actually they couldn't sustain themselves doing that, and they folded, they went bust. So we can see how there is this kind of difficulty within kind of feminist media making of how do you kind of negotiate, on the one hand, maintaining your integrity and your kind of ethos and values, whilst on the other hand, surviving. And then the second theme that I looked at was to do with kind of intersectionality. And what I did for this was looked at some readership surveys that Spare Rib had kind of commissioned. And what I found with those is that often within those, white readers in particular, so white British readers in particular, often rejected any attempt to shift away from a white feminist focus. And so it was really kind of seen as, if they were talking about anything that wasn't just about white women, it was seen as almost wasn't quite what they is that they intentionally made their workforce more diverse and more inclusive, and this led to a much more international focus. And this led to an understanding of feminism as being a global movement rather than just something that was catering for kind of white British middle class women. And again, I think as we move on, we'll see how this is something that we can also see kind of in the present day as well. So in terms of feminist media today, I think what we can see is that we still have this entanglement with capitalism. So this image here is if you've ever written Me Too as a hashtag, this is what will come up. But as you'll be aware, that hashtag exists on Twitter, which is of itself, Twitter is a multinational billion-dollar worth company. So every sort of feminism which is engaging with social media is also inherently engaging with capitalism, but also that's the way it becomes visible. So there is this kind of payoff there that you have to make. And even the Me Too movement itself, we can see how it ends up kind of revaluing kind of white feminist perspective. So Me Too became increasingly popular because of the work of Alyssa Milano, who's a white Hollywood actress. But obviously, as we all now know, the kind of the idea itself came from a black activist, Tarana Burke, whose work was kind of sidelined a little bit in favour of kind of the kind of Hollywood voices within the movement. And then we can also see, though, that on the flip side of this is that we've increasingly got anti-capitalist kind of sentiments within capitalist spaces. So Teen Vogue, which is a spin-off of Vogue, which obviously is owned by Condé Nast, they increasingly in the last kind of 5 or 6 years have become increasingly kind of feminist and kind of politically engaged in their kind of editorial. So a journalist called Lauren Duker had a series of columns called Thigh High Politics, which was heavily critical of Donald Trump when he became president of the US. They've had articles around kind of anti-capitalism and the problems with capitalism as it currently exists. However, we must place this within the context of the fact that even though the articles might be talking about that, the magazine is still owned by Condé Nast. It still needs to make a profit. It's still a capitalist enterprise. So I'm really kind of interested in what people think about this kind of tension between, on the one hand, these increasing feminist voices that exist within spaces which maybe make feminism more difficult in practice because they are kind of capitalist spaces. And so just to finish off with then, I wanted to, which also kind of harks to the past as well. So Galdem is a collective of women and non-binary people of colour based in the UK. They have a magazine which comes out once a year, but they have a blog that's updated kind of every day. And they have a mixture of a membership model alongside partnerships with the BBC. So they did a sponsored post for a new BBC show called I May Destroy You with Michaela Cole, Channel 4 and The Guardian. And they seem to be the closest that there is to maybe this model, which is inherent, you know, is kind of intentionally shying away from the mass media, whilst at the same time acknowledging the fact that it needs to also lean on kind of mainstream media outlets in order to kind of survive. So they seem to be the closest that I can see to kind of having that model. But as I said, I think one of the things that we maybe need to kind of think about is the limits of feminist media within a society which is kind of antithetical to kind of feminist aims and ideas. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Claire. And I think you had an eye on the clock. So because you have been able to wrap it up within the time given to you. So thank you so much.
Okay,
and
thank you.
There will be, of course, some questions. But it's a very interesting perspective that you have presented here, because most of the audience is from India. And of course, we want to know what is happening elsewhere. And all these movements are quite interconnected, and they tend to give and take from each other. And that's why there are some good pointers for us here studying the feminist media. And now let's move on to the next speaker of the session, Dr. Monisha Kadri, who is from the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication in Kashmir, right? So, Dr. Monisha, we will now like to hear you. And we have around 10 minutes
thank you,
or so. Yeah.
Yeah. Monisha, should we switch on the, should we start presenting? Prakash is our technical help. He is going to start the presentation for you.
Yeah, you may.
Okay.
Please be on slide number 2 for some time. Yeah. Thank you so much, Ujwala ma'am. It is such a privilege to be speaking in this seminar, particularly when Jayashree ma'am has just spoken and being part of this, brilliant panel. I'm really, really thrilled. So thank you so much. The title of my presentation is looking at news media narratives and gender justice. I may rather put forth my case as looking for this role of news media and reimagining gender justice, which is construed by news media. And also at the very outset, we must underline repeatedly that gender, whether in the news media or otherwise, is not exclusively a women's issue. It's a broad, inclusive canvas. So we can begin with a question. Does the term gender reflect in news discourses in its entirety, or is it confined to certain binaries of convenience, like we see in so many other distinguishable dichotomous identities regarding human beings and communities? The kind of gender justice and the kind of importance that gender justice and equality commands has not yet been realized. We understand that though it has been a Millennium Development Goal, it has now been a Sustainable Development Goal. And much before that, in 1995, during United Nations Beijing Platform for Action, they kind of proposed certain strategies that would enable women's human rights find allies in both media and information technologies. Now, 25 years later, we see that there are certain cases, there are multiple dynamics, in fact, regarding the idea of gender justice, which is not fully apparent in the ways we see news, or how news is shaped around the issues of gender. Whether we talk about the content, we talk about production, access, or even impact on the laws governing these issues. Now, first, if you look at the media content, the issue regarding media content, just like how stereotyping of women is a problem, stereotypical portrayal of men is incompatible with gender equality. And if we take stock of the news narratives regarding men and women, we will always be able to see that the social social construction as well as the media construction of femininity and masculinity, or even simply gender constructs, are absolutely inspired by each other, the social construction as well as the media construction. And as researchers, we've always found that there's a sexist bent in news coverage. If I request Surita to go to slides 3, 4, and 5, for example, these are examples from global media. And so we can see that this is a global phenomenon that exists. For example, a woman of authority is being identified through her social roles. Recently in India, a woman became vice chancellor of one of the universities. And I was analyzing some of the content, and I was surprised to find that most of the headlines were like tribal woman becomes vice chancellor, which you may not see in case of a man assuming a position of authority. Or even in case of the recent carnage through media trial in Sushant's case, what we've seen is that the images of a girlfriend being a gold digger or being unsuccessful in her career, or forcing an adult like Sushant to consume drugs, or even her identity being constructed by way of somebody who does black magic, has been prevalent, more reflective of a certain pattern of the way women's representation is seen in news, which is heavily derived from that stereotypical notion of a greedy other woman or the mistress, and rather than focusing on the logical or legal details from the case. So now currently we've seen that two women have become the talking points in this particular case, and there is a high degree of misogyny reflective in the kind of news coverage, particularly in television news. Then we talk about the production or people's access to news or media organizations, especially in context of their access to decision making within those media organizations. You may have recently seen images of how recently a woman reporter from one of the television channels finds it proper to shout from her moving vehicle and questions a female actor who's also in another moving vehicle about drugs. So doesn't the news media appear masculine? So that's another question that I want to ponder about. With some female journalists even imbibing certain traits to fulfill the image of a stereotypical male, the masculine news media. In case of newsroom diversity, women may comprise more than half when it comes to students graduating in communications and journalism, but eventually only a third of the newsroom is female. And very few break the glass ceiling, that too without being stereotyped. We did a research in Kashmir a few years back over this issue, and let me tell you, the results were really grim. I'm sure Jayashree ma'am has handled this beautifully. And in case of Kashmir, when you add another dimension of conflict, it becomes more grim. And then there are issues which kind of highlight that there's little gender sensitive system. There's a problem when it comes to having a gender sensitive system in media, or the laws against gender violence have not been institutionalized, and women kind of, they are stopped from voicing their opinion from the fear of being ostracized or being discriminated against later on. Thirdly, when we look at the issue of people's access and the relationship that they have with media as citizens, as audiences, as experts, or as subjects of news, the rights of women and other genders are part of a minuscule coverage being discussed in the news. Rights of women are not so much of an interest when it comes to being a subject in news. There's a global media monitoring project, and which has been one of the largest and the most, it has been a longest longitudinal study on gender in the world over. And it studies news media, and they have found that less than 25% of the news subjects are actually women. And when we talk about other genders, how many times are issues concerning gender fluidity reflected in the prime time television news debates or on front pages? These issues continue to be part of the stories on culture, on entertainment, or offbeat reporting, but not the mainstream generally. And then finally, if you look at another issue, as I mentioned earlier, which is about impacting the laws and policies related to gender justice, there's a lack of sensitization towards the towards cases concerning gender violence and abuse. There is still a debate whether you would use violence or abuse. And when you use violence, you keep away a lot of things which should be part of the discussion otherwise. And the language that is being used has to be sensitive about survivors, about victims of a crime and their identity. And add to that, the desirable follow-ups required for law and policy changes on ground are not seen to the extent that they should have been, which would eventually force a change in policies. Further, we are aware of, I'm talking about Nirbhaya case, we are aware of the hype that was created after that case, and how the narcotizing dysfunction performed by media by way of excessive reporting lulled the audiences into believing that much was being done. Only this year the rapists were finally punished. Still, in one of the researches that we did back then, regarding the news coverage of this particular case by two prominent English newspapers of India, we found that in the week immediately after the crime, the most circulated English daily of India had not written an editorial on this particular issue. Editorials have a role to specify a problem, to identify a problem, analyze and suggest remedies. But what issues are being discussed right now, for example, female celebrities consuming drugs, which again is being done superficially, as it does not really go down and translate onto issues at the grassroots. However, there is an interesting case of media trial for gender justice. There are multiple cases, but I'm picking one, which is from across the border. The story of Mukhtar Mai in Pakistan. It's a well-known case, which was there in news, who was gang raped on the orders of a council of tribal elders from her village. The exact replica of what we have seen in case of Khap Panchayats and their decrees in some states in India. 4 volunteers actually came up and they performed the kind of the sentence, the gang rape, and it was done in front of a cheering mob. I am reminded of a case similar on similar lines in India back in 2014. But at the same time, Sunanda Pushkar, who again was identified through her relationship with her husband, or she was identified using her husband's authority, position of authority and name. She died in 2014, and at the same time similar incident happened in India. But we can very easily understand which case would have been highlighted by news media. However, in case of Mai, she went ahead and she reported to local media and international media, and eventually there was media attention which shamed the entire civil authorities back there, and finally the culprits were sentenced to life in prison. And she eventually went on to win a lot of accolades and prizes, and she also became the Glamour magazine's Woman of the Year in 2005. Also, her case was used for furthering certain amendments in the 1976 rape law in the country. Thus, we can confirm that the idea of gender mainstreaming needs to proliferate at different levels, whether that's mainstream news media or online media or the alternative media. It has to kind of percolate into all these levels, and it needs to exist because gender justice is critical in its own right and central to the achievement of justice in all other factors. I'll leave you with a very confusing example in slide 6. But before that, let me just read read few lines from a poem written by a college student, Anusuya Sen Gupta. She was a college student who wrote a poem when Hillary Clinton came to India, and this poem is part of Hillary Clinton's memoir. And it says, "Too many women in too many countries speak the same language, the language of silence." I thank you so much for your time and patience. I'm really, really grateful for each one of you.
I have such a wonderful panel that as the chair, I don't have to remind them of the time available to them. and that shows that they really know their topic very well, and a good communicator knows how to present the topic well in the given time. So thanks so much, Dr. Manisha, for leaving us with some very interesting thoughts, and I'm sure there will be some questions. I can see a few questions already typed there. Please let the questions keep coming in, and we will try to address all of the questions in the Q&A session after the presentations. Now I will not like to request Dr. Kritika to give a presentation. Dr. Kritika is from Pondicherry. She's from the Department of Visual Communication, Pondicherry University Community College. Welcome, Dr. Kritika. You may start.
Yeah, thank you. I should first of all thank Progata for having me as a part of this webinar. And it's a very interesting session from yesterday. I have been listening to all the lectures. It was really impressive and very informative. So thank you, Progata, for taking my presentation. I should present my screen now and after that. Okay, the topic of the paper that I'm presenting today is issues in digital sustainability among rural women of India. All over the world, actually, information and communication technology.
Kritika,
Yes.
there might be an audio issue if everyone is having the same issue. There is a lot of echo coming in. I think you are you are switched on from both devices. I guess the audio is on from both devices. That's why it's catching an echo, perhaps.
Yeah, the audio is not very clear. Mine also. So if that issue can be resolved, it will be better for everybody.
Is it clear now? Is it clear now?
No, not the same.
Okay, then I think I will stop the presentation and probably. Is it clear now?
Can you speak again? No. No. I think the audio from this device you are currently switched on. That is a problem, perhaps. That device is the problem. You can try the audio in the other device, perhaps.
Okay, one second. Is it clear?
Can you speak again? No. Still the echo problem is there.
Surita?
Yes.
Surita, can we do this way that if Padmini is ready, we can start with her, and then you can get offline with Kritika and try to solve the problem?
Sure, no problem.
Will that be okay? Yes. Padmini, is that okay with you? Padmini?
Yes, why? That's okay with me. I'll just switch on the camera.
Yeah, if you can start, then that will give Kritika some time to address the issue, and so that she is not under any pressure right now. Okay, so we will switch over to Padmini, and you may start now, Padmini.
Okay, because
Yes, Padmini, you may start your presentation. Yes, Padmini, are you ready?
Padmini, your audio is very low. Volume needs to be increased.
Yeah, I would like to request pardon from the participants here. This is technology over which we have little control at times, but
Fine now?
we will be getting on soon.
Hello, am I audible to everyone?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, Padmini, it's better.
And is my screen visible, my presentation visible?
Not yet, but maybe it will
Not yet?
soon be
Well,
clear.
I'll again click on the share screen. I think I did that. So just a second. Share. Okay, yes. Is it there now?
No, not for me at least. No.
What do I do? So somebody will have to help me in this. Okay, I'm on Google Meets and I'm sharing my screen. Cancel.
Padmini, have you sent? You have sent the PPT, right? Presentation.
Oh, I don't think I've shared it.
Okay.
No, do you have that presentation open already on your laptop?
Yeah, I have it open and I have even clicked the share screen button.
Oh,
so if the organizers can please help me share my screen.
You have clicked on the share screen button, right? Present now, and then you have shared the entire screen.
Yes. Present now, share your entire screen. Share. Okay, I'll try sharing a window instead.
Yeah, let's do that. Maybe it will take time.
Stop sharing.
Yes, Padmini, it is seen now.
It is there now? Great.
Yeah, we can see it. Please go ahead.
Sorry for the trouble, and I hope my audio is also clear.
Yes, perfect. Both is perfect, audio and visual, both. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Sorry for the initial technical glitches that we had. And I'll just try and do the full screen, which I'm not able to. Yeah. Well, hi. Today, what I shall discuss is the changing narratives about gender in popular media. So with popular media, I'll refer to 4 media, and if the time permits, I'll go through all 4 or I'll skip whatever is needed as such. So first of all, let me just begin by kind of saying that why do we have to worry about media and gender? It is because media mirrors the society. Sometimes we say that whatever is happening in the society, the same thing the media is reflecting. But I believe that at many times it's the other way around also. You know, what you see happening maybe on television or in films, you kind of imbibe and imitate the same. So that observational learning also happens through media. So it's a reflection and also a refraction of the society. It, I think, shapes the public opinion and is to extent responsible for changing the society also. And we do see the roles of women and the gender perspectives changing around us as a result of the media portrayals. The echoes in discussions and even in actions are happening. So sometimes the stereotypes are actually strengthened by the media, but at other times, they sometimes inspire us to break the stereotypes and create certain new molds. So some basic concepts, I'll not go through their definitions and all. We all know about male gaze, that they say that whatever is portrayed has always been from the eyes of a male, how he looks at the female. Then social constructivism, that has always been one thing that media has been blamed for, that they're constructing identities rather than kind of coming out with them. And stereotyping, of course, that males and females are portrayed in a certain manner. So keeping all these concepts in mind, I will go through very quickly the changing portrayals. So media's gender narrative, I would actually say that, the writer of The Second Sex says that one is not born a woman, but made one. I, as a media student, would say that media plays a huge role in kind of making the woman out of you, the woman that you are. And why so do I say that, what is beautiful to what is acceptable, what is likable, what are your ideal vital statistics, or even the menu in your kitchen is somehow dictated by the media. I was reading a book the other day, which is Eating in the Moonlight, as per the moon. You have to change your eating habits. And this writer says a very interesting thing, that centuries back, the ideal body of a woman was not what it is today. Round was the worshipped shape, but now it is about a line as compared to the round. So this is all kind of the way that media has been portraying it, and we tend to believe that this is the real truth. And that is a paradox in which the women find themselves caught. Apart from women, today I would just like to quickly also run through the inclusion of the new gender, that is the LGBTQ community, the other gender. So from the times that they were actually laughed upon or ridiculed in the cinema, television, or even in the news media, we have come to some positively interesting times where, their sexual choices, and they are portrayed as smart people who can make their own choices. So all said and done, so today in my thing, I feel the discussion of gender is not complete till we talk of male, female, and LGBTQ plus community. I have divided it into 4 parts. I'll give 2 minutes to each of them: cinema, television, web series, and advertisement. That is how I understand the popular media, as in the entertainment domain. My colleague just talked about the news domain, so I think it's interesting to come to the entertainment domain now. I would begin with cinema. It's been ages since ever we academically started studying cinema. We've been saying that, woman is portrayed nothing but as a glam doll. So this has been a blame on it, that it only portrays it as an object. So I'm looking at the Hindi films. I did a content analysis of Hindi films from 60s to 2015. And I'll kind of take a little cue from that research, that a woman might be portrayed as any strong person, a journalist, a doctor, a lawyer, or anybody. But her goal actually remains to woo the person she is set her eyes on. So she is, stereotypical portrayals are there. So whatever she is doing, she still has to fit into that male's perspective of the ideal woman. But I would still say that things have been good also. Cinema has been a major point of reference for Indian culture, and female ambassadors have actually done that in a good manner also. So, what I'm trying to do is to argue a case from both point of views. So she has been an object, but the positive portrayals in which women have actually been the central character and treated with dignity have also crossed our theaters. So there have been films where the world is depicted through our eyes, films like Lajja by Rajkumar Santoshi to, Chingari, Dushman Sangharsh, many of the Bollywood films. The point I would like to make here is that journey of the Bollywood heroine from, say, the 60s to the 2010s has been very, very filled with nuances. But one thing has been common. I feel that she was always assertive. The heroine was always coy. She was shy, elusive. Her eyelids would drop when she was talking to a male of any capacity, be her prospective husband or the villains or such. Her posture was always protective, that Indian women were depicted in that protective posture. But the positive thing was she has been assertive. So I would like to take roles from, as back as 1961, in which Hum Tum is a movie in which Sadhana portrays the role of Meeta, where her lover goes on his own journey in life, and she is not married to him still, but she comes to live in his house to take care of his elderly mother. So she knew what she was doing. From those times to Vidya of Shri 420, which was Nargis, even before the 60s, she could say no to a man who she felt was ethically astray. So these women, from Tulsi of Roti Kapda of Makan, who fights against a rapist, or Guddi of Jaya Bachchan portrayed Guddi, who is very clear whom she would like to marry. These women were assertive, actually. So the assertion ruled, and that I feel has been the silver lining, or I would say the golden cloud of our Hindi Bollywood cinema. That she might have been in posture very coy, but her assertion was there in her thoughts. She was villainous or virtuous. Maybe, the roles might have been that she was going wrong, she was going right, but the assertion ruled. Even the vamps, if you say the Helens, Bindus, or Shashikalas of the times, they might be the betrayer or the estrayed women, but assertive and strength was there. And then there came a wonderful era of Hindi cinema where she could break the mold, She dared to challenge the accepted and the acceptable and had the strength to actually set new molds. So, Nikaha, in which the protagonist marries another man for a reason that her husband has no time for her. So there was no big reason shown, okay, he's a wife beater or someone who's a womanizer. She leaves him that you have no time for me. And that was in 1980s. To Zakhmi Aurat, where women take revenge of the people who actually wronged them, as in raped them. To Earth, where a woman leaves her husband, even if he tries to come back to her and says that, would you have accepted me if I had come back? So this kind of breaking stereotypes has not been uncommon for her Indian cinema, and now a new wave of cinema where the women are turning unapologetic. She is having sexual desires and she is unapologetic to actually admit them. From Ishkia to Dead Ishkia, I think these movies wonderfully portrayed that. So I would say there has been a birth of a new avatar where the coyness disappeared. She's been too sure. She matches the male in every disposition and sometimes even overpowers her. So there's been examples of movies in the entire 2000 to 2015 or 20 where we see this happening, and I feel this is a very welcome change. Another thing about cinema that I would like to say, that men also have been shown to assume the paternal or the maternal role. From 1968 Brahmachari to Main Aisa Hi Hoon in 2005, where the men are bringing up children, whether they are looking after orphanages or their own children, these things have been shown. So even the men ka feminine side has been portrayed in India. About the other gender, so you have movies like, who can forget that Sadak, in which Sadashiv Umrapuri played this strong role of Maharani, who was the big villain. Then you have Tamanna, in which Paresh Rawal is again a eunuch, but there's the eunuch in a positive portrayal. So our films have thankfully brought this gender also to the center stage. So now there have, of course, been the new voices where you have gays in Aligarh, I Am, Bombay Talkies, or My Brother Nikhil, where they are gay things, and more recently Shubh Mangal Zyada Satan have been portrayed. They can even be the protagonists in the main stories. And wonderfully so, even the women have been shown, the lesbian relationships have been shown, and all these movies have kind of justified these women going into the asexual relationships, be it Fire, where Shabana Azmi and Nandita Das did portray it, or Dead Ishqiya, where Madhuri Dixit was there with a newly came Huma Qureshi, where it justified their sexual choices. So this is one thing where we say that cinema has actually reflected or maybe changed our society. I would say this is the way it has done. Now, quickly moving over to television. I did a television research way back in 2002, where we said that the soap operas have only one thing. There is a middle-class girl who gets married into a high business family, and she does everything wonderfully, clad in her kanjivarams, Mangal Sutra, all the jewelry. She sleeps with her sari, wakes up in the morning with heavy jewelry, and her sole aim is actually to get a husband and to retain him. This is what a television series portrayed for good 2 decades. The heroine was actually beautiful, extra capable, honest, direct, intelligent, but as soon as she gets married, she ceases to be everything else. So be it Jassi Jaisi Koi Nahi, the serial that was very, very phenomenal and something that was new. But even after Jassi gets married, she just looks after her family politics. So she's been stereotyped in these roles. So the heroine and her aim have just been to catch a male and to retain him. But real life is very, very different. It doesn't suffice to folding saris and, just fighting with your mother-in-law, trying to find your space. So the good part is that television from very, very early stages has portrayed strong women. I would take 2 examples of Rajini, portrayed by Priya Tandulkar, and Kalyani Singh, a character in Udan, portrayed by Kavita Chaudhary. So these were, way back, 4 decades back, they had women who knew their mind and who dared to speak so and do their own acts in a male-dominated world. One good thing that television, apart from the bad things that it did, was it portrayed a male making khana. So Khana Khazana, which ran for good 2 decades, 20 years, brought the feminine side again of the male of in the kitchen. Like films brought the maternal side, this male was actually cooking and doing things. Now there's also been on television, they brought in the other gender. One serial that they made on this, on Colors, was Shakti, where there is this girl who is again an eunuch and how she's being portrayed. I'll now spend the next 2 minutes to the web series, which I think is a welcome change. The glamorous image or the poor thing attitude that was exhibited mostly in the television now has got a stereotypical image that is breaking with the web series, or we say the OTT platform that is coming, the multidimensional portrayal of reality is actually coming to light. So I would like to specially mention 3 web series: Arya, Out of Love, and Delhi Crime. So these are women who are strong. The portrayals are by Sushmita Sen in Arya, where her husband passes away and she looks after her children. And in doing so, she also has to look after the business, in which there are gangs, there are drug mafia, and how she strongly does that. There is another series, Out of Love, on Hotstar, where Rasika Duggal portrays a doctor who is wronged by her husband. Her husband has an affair. She learns about it and how she tackles that thing. And another, Delhi Crime, where Shefali Chaya portrays the police officer who is in charge of looking after the Nirbhaya case. Why I've picked these 3 particularly? These 3 women are women who are soft. They are not women with short hair or women who dress up like males, like we were talking that in news media, even if you have to go to the office, you kind of have to assume that male role. They are very much feminine. They speak softly, they dress like women, they have long hair. They are soft yet strong. They are righteous, they do not do wrong, and they neither do tolerate wrong. So with their image which is petite, which is very, very protected women and their families, but when the situation comes, they are assertive again. So therefore I say that web series has brought in this real woman on the screens of our televisions or mobile screens. So these women also can be flawed. There are 3 series again I would mention: 100 on Hotstar, 4 Shots Please on Amazon, and Inside again on Amazon. So these series are women. 100 mein Lara Datta is a woman who has an affair even if she has a good husband. 4 Shots Please is a character portrayed by a woman who actually can go and sleep another male if she has to have some benefits for her team, a cricket team on which she's looking after, in Inside Edge.
Can you wrap up in the next 2 minutes? Please?
Of course, I'll wrap up in next 2 minutes. And in 4 Shots Please, you have 4 women who are flawed. They drink, they smoke, they have multiple sexual partners. But these are women who are doing well for themselves and they are unapologetically happy and proud of the choices that they make. So this is one good thing that I would say that the web series or the world of OTT is doing. Flawed, unapologetic, strong, soft, all these domains of the women have actually come into the domain. Another thing about the web series, it has brought erotica to the table. I would like to have maybe another paper to kind of describe it fully, but quickly in 30 seconds. So these are Extreme or Ullu app or Balaji Alt app, where they're erotic series, where that sexuality is being portrayed. And so it has its own, criticizers, but I would just like to say that it is happening on the platform. And also differences of, people is coming. So Made in Heaven has a major character, the main protagonist, who is a gay. So he's respected and accepted for that. He goes through his own trials and tribulations. And again, in 4 Shots Please, you have a woman, Bani, who goes on to marry another woman in a great pomp and show ceremony. So their sexual choices are again now being brought to the table. So this is what I wanted to say. And about the web, again, another thing that, web, other than the OTT platform, when Google Doodle celebrates the Pride Month, or it celebrates Marsha Johnson, who was an activist for LGBTQ community, this again brings it to the mainstream. This is how media actually impacts it. Quickly, 30 seconds to touch about advertisements.
Please wind up. Yeah.
So advertisements have usually portrayed women in their stereotypical roles. There have either been the women who are looking after their babies. So Johnson does not have a father looking after the baby, but mother, or women who are obsessed with the ideal skin or the ideal hair, or with the jewelry and clothing. So this is what the advertisements also have depicted since, decades. Or maybe the sexualized women. So only 3 kinds of women: the obsessed one, the caretaker, or the sexualized, whose body can sell anything from cigarettes to cars. But again, I would say this a wonderful change in the world of advertisement also, which is coming, a change. So one ad that I would refer, this is by Vatika. Vatika,
I'm really...
I'm just winding up. These are just the last examples. I'm just winding up. Yes, Ujjwala ma'am, I'm careful. So Vatika is a hair care product, but they here show a woman who is fighting cancer and has gone bald. And wonderfully, they actually give a message that you are beautiful in the concept what you are. So a hair care product actually to be showing a woman without hair and still celebrating her beauty, I think is a wonderful change that's just coming. And then we have many ads around us, ads by Havels, where a male says, I will change my surname after marrying or Ariel, where a father says, now we need to teach our sons. Or
I'm
maybe
sorry,
certain things.
Padmini.
Yes,
I'm
Ujjwala,
sorry, Padmini.
this
Yeah,
is the
please.
last slide. This is the
Yeah,
last
yeah, yeah.
slide. So, what my closing remarks in this is that media has actually the changing narratives. There are
Yeah.
wonderful changes that are happening through our films, televisions, web series, and advertisement, which are the popular media, where different roles, breaking stereotypes and social constructivism now is happening is a very, very positive manner. So, on this positive note, thank you so
Yes.
much. I'll wind up here.
Thank you. Yeah, you covered a very broad spectrum across four media, which was a tough task. But we would like to go back to Kritika now. I'm sorry, Kritika, I cut your session earlier because I didn't want you to be under any pressure setting up, trying to find a solution to your problem. So please, over to you. You may start right away. And people can answer to those queries in the chat box as well. Over to Kritika, please. Unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Kritika. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. So extremely sorry for the technical glitch earlier. So let me get into the
issues.
presentation
Yeah,
straight away.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope all of you can hear me. The topic for today is issues in digital sustainability among rural women of India. So, as we all know that all over the world, information and communication technologies are seen as playing a crucial role in the socio-economic development. And Indian government also has been making lots of policy interventions to increase the access and adoption rate of ICTs. And numerous ICT projects has been implemented in various rural and technologically underdeveloped areas all over the world in the hope to foster development. Most of these projects are either run by research organizations for academic research purposes or by non-governmental organizations, or in some instances, we also have state funded projects which are fully or partially funded by the state. So in India, we have had many initiatives like Gyan Dut, E-Seva, Drishti, E-Choppals, etc. But it has been widely observed that the benefits of these initiatives and the so-called development associated with ICTs are short-lived, and they seem to vanish as soon as the funds of the initiative or project is exhausted. Most of the ventures have remained as projects and have failed to become initiatives in any given society. And mostly the benefits that are drawn out of these ICTs are generally exaggerated. And it seems to have only heightened the dependency syndrome among the women, despite the fact that women had greater access to ICTs than men in most of these initiatives. And are these projects really helpful in bridging the digital divide among the rural masses? Has it been helpful in developing women who are actually socially, culturally, and politically disadvantaged sections of the Indian society is a big question. So there has always been the hope in much of this development literature that ICTs would improve people's lives by giving them access to larger system of information that would somehow allow them to improve their economic status. Between all this, the communicative ecology should be supported by ethnographic mapping tools to understand how technology can be used and how technologically mediated content fit into their lives. For example, in one case that I noticed is in Assam and Meghalaya, in the low-cost Chinese mobile sets are available in many tea estates, but they did not really have the electricity to charge their mobile phones. So they had to come to a common place to charge their mobile phones. So through this study, we analyzed the digital penetration among women in the rural areas of Tamil Nadu and the Union Territory of Pondicherry, both in the southern part of India. The impact of these ICT initiatives in increasing the digital access of rural women was studied, and I'll be elaborating more on the qualitative data of the study. And we chose two projects for post-initiative analysis. One is MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, and the next is Enlock Communications Private Limited. And their proposed objectives of the project was to build sustainable livelihood for the marginalized communities rural communities through transfer of knowledge economy capabilities and the use of information and communication technology. And many of the ICT studies collect data during the short course of the study, and they do not really revisit the communities to determine the impact. So this particular study is a revisitation of such areas to understand the impact of these projects once the projects have been withdrawn. Okay. So majority of the samples were chosen from the vicinity of the village building. This is one of the buildings, where the village knowledge center was run. So we chose the samples from the vicinity of the building, to study the impact on these people. So the coming to the results, majority of the women who had learned computers from the kiosk don't have access to computers after the kiosk was closed. So this is a picture of one of the kiosks which is completely closed in Madurai district of Tamil Nadu. And the Tamil Nadu government has issued free laptops. The one this lady is using is a free laptop issued by the Tamil Nadu government. And this is issued for school children. These women who are trained in Microsoft Unlimited Potential program by the kiosk, they are using laptops but only for entertainment purposes. And mostly mobile phones are the most informative media, next only to TV, and only women for their inability to access smartphones. So we were quite surprised that 49% of the women used internet in their mobile phones every day. But the problem, not exactly a problem, but what we actually noticed is they used it only for entertainment purposes, like accessing WhatsApp or social media. And they used to get tailoring designs, cookery recipes, watching videos, and and also young mothers used to help their school children in their homework and other things. So creating increased access to digital technologies without adequate orientation and sensitization has been a problem that we noticed in most of these cases. So our findings show that learning computer course in the kiosk has not really brought any significant difference in their access to digital media sources like smartphones. And the diffusion of smartphones has increased the rural women's access to digital media, but the contribution of kiosk in bridging the digital divide has not been very significant. And the survey results show that 91% of the respondents have smartphones in their house, and 79% use internet in mobile. But this also could be a case because this is actually the percentage that I'm quoting is much higher than the national average, mainly because of the selected areas of the survey, because Tamil Nadu is one of the most developed states in the country in terms of gross domestic product and other criteria. So the extraordinary growth in telecommunication facilities all over India as of 2019, there is an increase in female internet users as well. So that is a good sign. But has the ICT initiatives really helped in bringing about this change is a big question. There are also categorical inequalities inside houses, like children and male members use the phone more, use the computers more. If at all a computer is bought, or if at all a computer is used, it is mostly for the children or for the male member, and it is quite rare, that for a female member a laptop is bought or a computer is used. So many women in the villages of Pondicherry who are managing household chores and doing jobs as tailors and working in factories, they've got computer training from the kiosk. But now they say that they hardly remember even the operations, because the VKCs or the centers are not operational now. And particularly the coastal village of Kovalam in Kanyakumari, which got free network, free internet from Tata Telecom Services, and they were supplied with 12 CDMA mobile phones within a mobile application called Fisher Friend program. And the Fisher Friend program, actually the app actually gives them weather conditions suitable for fishing, and also provides market rates for the women who sell fish. But now the center is closed. The app is operational, but it is not accessible for women. And the public address system, which used to give details about also not functioning. And most of the women who learned, do not really use those systems, because they are not allowed to go out of their village to use the computer or learn computers. So that was not allowed. Only when the VKC was there, they were actually able to use computers or learn computers because it was free of cost and it was within the village. But now they are totally, not in touch with any of these technologies. And this was.
Can you now wrap up in a minute or so? I'm sorry to suggest that.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I
yeah.
should. Yes. I would just like to add one statement made by one of the village heads in Kovalam, where he said it all came like Oki. Oki is a cyclonic storm that came in 2017. So he said it all came like Oki and went away. Since the time they are gone, all the development activities that were happening in our village have stopped. So we are back to our old self. So this is the statement that we found in almost every village, where they said, they used us as testing grounds. We are not in touch with anything. We are not benefited by it. They took us to Delhi and nothing really happened. So this is the case with all. If this had been the condition before the lockdown necessitated by COVID pandemic, it can be safely assumed that the situation may have considerably worsened ever since. And a huge majority of the women who are employed by the informal sector, which has been hugely hit by the economic downturn due to the lockdown, obviously poor quality and access to education, it's all related to informal sector employment. So when the economic status of women employed in the informal sector takes a huge hit, the first thing to suffer is the digital access. And so obviously, the only thing that is possible, the initiatives which can bring about big change rather than being a brief initiative. So government effective implementation of policies groups needs further studies. So that's all.
Yeah. Thank you so much, and sorry to rush you through your presentation, but there are other presentations, other sessions lined up, and it's a chairperson's nightmare when they have to interrupt the presenters when such beautiful and well-researched papers are being presented. So I take this opportunity to thank all the panelists, and of course, this has started discussion. There will be many questions, and I can see that the panelists have started responding to the questions because we cannot take them orally here right now. And I could see a broad spectrum, like you can divide this session into two sections. One is portrayal of women and the other is the women using the media, right? But what Kritika's was about the lower section of the society, how ICT empowered women can bring in a change in their lives, whereas Claire's talked about feminism and the feminist media, and what Monisa and Padmini did was how women are portrayed and what changes can be seen and what better changes still should be seen there. And we are going through very turbulent times, in a way to say. On the one hand, we have the corona, the online spaces that we have created for ourselves, but we also have to think of the sustainability of our presence on the digital media, even if we want to start our own media in the digital space. So there are so many questions that this session has opened up, and I'm sure the academic fraternity will give it a thought further, and we will try to keep in touch with each other and build upon each other's research experiences and insights. And I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to participate in this wonderful session. Over to Surita and her colleagues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. And it is the chairs, this is how you have proved the excellency of the chair, that you have given the solution to use the chat box. So also the digital, how we have managed that simultaneously they are answering the question, discussion is going on, and the presentation is going on. Thank you for this.
Communication. Guru Govind Singh Indraprastha University, New Delhi. She has been a television journalist with Doordarshan News, New Delhi, and also worked with Digital News Ventures. Her PhD thesis explores coverage of Arab Spring by news television in India. She recently contributed to the Network of Women and Media in India report titled Panel or Manels, Desperately Seeking Women in Indian TV News Debates. She is currently contributing for the GMMP project, a global study that monitors the representation of women in media. She has presented papers in several international and research grants. Over to you, Shweta ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And taking things forward, It was great to listen to the presentations today, especially Jayashree Jethwani ma'am, and it was nice to see Ujjwala ma'am chairing the sessions with the distinguished presenters, Monisha, Kritika, and Padmini. So it was great learning for me as well. So beginning the session today, I hope the presenters are all lined up, and I think we can begin the session. And since we have slight readjustment of timings, so what we can do is we can take the questions towards the end of the technical session. So we will not take questions after presentation like Ujjwala ma'am did with the earlier session. So we'll take all the questions keeping in mind the pace of the presentations. So I hope all presentations are lined up, and we would like to begin with the first presentation of the day. If it's lined up, the diverse masculinities in South Indian cinema, a study on the notions of masculinity in South Indian cinema by Dr. Shamala R., Assistant Professor, Department of Media and Communication, Central University of Tamil Nadu. So let's have the presentation. And you may ask your questions, leave your questions in the chat box, and we may take them up towards the end.
हेलो हाँ वो प्रेजेंट कर दीजिए
Ma'am, I should let you know at the end of 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah. Hi. Hello, ma'am. Good evening. Good evening to all the presenters. Okay. So now I'll bring it down to the South Indian cinemas. Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So I'm bringing down the panel to the South Indian cinemas now. Cinema is a notion of society. Okay, it has always been a debate. So whatever happens in society is reflected in cinemas, or whatever is happening in the cinemas or the series which are coming, or the serials, like, the media, it is reflecting the society. It's still a debate. Okay, when we come down to the South Indian cinemas, especially when we see we see that, women are outward and going up. There are few movies to come. When we take categorically the cinemas from past 15 to 20 years, more and more cinemas and the popular heroes usually are there. I want to cite this one personal example when I was speaking to one of the filmmakers, especially this Chandramukhi film, Rajnikant's movie was there. Okay, and they said Avinash was talking. He played that role of the priest in that who performs, and he was dressed up, as if a tantric kind, and it was so weird. He himself went and requested that, sir, that I cannot see my own look. And and they were arguing with the director that sir, his look has to be changed. Okay, he thanked Rajnikant. They said the people will accept like this. People want their acceptance like this. Okay, they will not accept him. The audience will not accept mere character. And again, there's one more example. One of the cinematographer who told us that when Chini Kam of Amitabh Bachchan was released, Rajnikant was so carried away and he wanted to do that film. And his wife and daughter, it is an informal discussion. They stopped him. They said, like, you cannot play. You cannot see that over-dominate. People don't want to take that you are aged. It is very difficult. And later, his movies also came like this. So now I'm talking about the female characters and the male characters projection. So it is always a damsel in distress. Okay. Ajit had acted in a dual role where one was a dancer, and it was very it is a role that it was very difficult. Okay, they had one more, there's the twins who are born, so one is full of that male, okay, the other one is a feminine concept. So that was difficult. So just to make an adjustment, okay, there was two characters which were played. Okay, the concept of plural masculinity, and not only between men and women, but among men themselves has created the characters and storyline which are extremely stereotyped. This study, what we objected for the study, does the South Indian popular cinemas have masculine representation that reinforces the existing patriarchal male images through Semitic symbols like similar myths, metaphor, and messages, and do have a new alternative model which covertly defies the traditional ones. And we used persuasive analysis for this study. Okay, we had certain parameters where we had watched these movies and started writing on the projection, how the male characters have been defined in terms of female characters, like femininity, masculine identities produced, their cultural structure of social and their approaches to the gender, the codes of every society, color, and that basis masculinity. These visuals are then brought forward and again acceptance of cinema's narratives that have both reflected and influenced the gender notion. Okay, the South Indian cinema show that the notion of masculinity are not so static. They are evolving according to the time space in which they operate. Like we have certain parameters where we quoted, and we are when we started writing on this, working on this. Okay, first one is we took as one of the variable as alpha male. Okay, there are those, I can give you an example for this, the KGF, recently the super hit movie, that KGF which was there. Okay, the hero is seen an answer for every problem, and he's too ambitious, overworldly, where when the female character is also has a very, very lesser role to play. But it is more about the man and his character and the background of this character. He is the mother of that hero. That how she builds him, and she says that you have to be the winner. Okay, you need to get people with you to be a winner. Okay, rather approaching that asking for some mercy. How you have to build yourself to that strong level. Okay, and there is a even in Rajnikant's movie, he's on one classical alpha we can call, and he surely have the power to intimidate. He would have overcome the adversaries in a good way, but he can reinforce the traditional patriarchal hegemony of masculinity. We've seen his movie from Peta, then his the recent movies, which speaks about women character, how he's very poised, okay, decent, but there is a definition that how a woman or a housewife or this thing has to be. I'll tell you for this again, when recently the Ramayana television serial was going on, when there is an episode that when the climax episode almost when Sita goes into this thing, my mother who is 60 years old, I mean, she was like questioning when when a woman is talking, why nobody is talking. I mean, that is what the Rama's character is. That is what it said. Not completely not
Dr. Shamala, if
that's
you
reinforcing
can
the myth. Yes,
wind up,
yes,
please.
ma'am. I'll just finish. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So the next one is homosexuality. Yeah, this is a just I will speak about this homosexuality. This is one this thing which is difficult. When we talk about all this, when we saw the earlier presentation also, the masculine that required to show their fear or weakness to hide all their traits. Okay, so this is a big debated one, which is also existing. Okay, though there are Indian movies which are now highlighting more on this social phenomena. There seem to be no effort in South Indian cinemas. It's very difficult. There are very, very few movies which talk on these topics. Lastly, the omnipotence. This is the Identify series and pleasure that stood up by the cinematic images have received a greater deal of attention from the writers and in the cultural language that argues in the correspondence between the cinema and unconsciousness mind, both in terms of how and what the mind thinks. Watching this film also publicly shared cultural activity, as Mule says, and others have argued in relation to the notion of
Dr.
patriarchal
Shamala,
notion. Ma'am, I'll just
we
go
have
to the
just
last one,
exceeded a bit
toxic
of your bit, so if you
masculinity.
can conclude.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
conclude.
So for toxic masculinity, I'll give the example of movie that Arjun Reddy, which was remade in Hindi also, where he is alcoholic, but he goes on talks foul mouth about the women, but still he is so acceptable and is loved by all. The toxicness which is loved. And in conclusion, I just want to conclude that the cinema's reflection to the society, and about the behavior, aspiration, cultural norms, empathy that creates its catalyst for raising the concern about gender norms and its projects. The popular cinema is projecting of masculinity, developed different power focal points and institutions. They are represented in various ways. So the impact of the contemporary culture justifies the need of the study of these patterns in future. So there should be more and more studies should come out where they point out all this and find the trajectories of all this diverse masculinity should be towards the gender equality rather. Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry that I have taken a lot of
Thank you so much. no, we completely understand. And, when you have worked hard on your paper, you would like to share much of your findings with people, and we are all here to listen to that. It's just that we have a bit of time constraint. So I request every presenter to kindly stick to their 6 minutes time limit, and so that we have some questions towards the end to kind of make this session productive through interactions by answering those questions. So can we now have the second presenter? This is Decriminalizing Women in Social Media, a comparative study of sentiments for or against Riya Chakravarti in Twitter before and after her arrest. Sarita Bose, Assistant Professor, and Archana Mitra, Assistant Professor, School.
We are not becoming the consumers, so we need a shift from being the sole producers. We also need to become the consumer. So the concept of prosumer needs to be adapted in this digital public sphere that once Lev Manovic told when he was discussing about new media in his concepts. So in lieu with that, what we have done is we have done a totally primary study on the huge problem that rise after the Sushant Singh Rajput case on June 14th. And what we did was we took up sentiments that before Riya Chakraborty's arrest by CBI and tweets which were done after the arrest. So we did a comparative analysis of how these two could relate to one another and see that how the sentiment of the people towards the tweets, towards the information that is being shared on social media was analyzed with the help of NVivo tools and other tools, which I will discuss in my methodology. So the objective was very simple. We have kept it to the root exactly to find out the sentiments pre and post the arrest. And we have used a technique called geotag. We use this technique of geotag from Google Map to keep the tweets based on India only. We have not taken tweets from outside the country. So after that, we did an NVivo sentiment analysis, and we have kept the analysis to positive, neutral, and negative comments only. So coming to the methodology part, that we have kept it qualitative because we are doing a discourse analysis of the total sentiment. So we have kept it totally to qualitative. The sampling area, or basically what we have done is we have taken tweets on Riya Chakraborty and Sushant Singh Rajput on the arrest of Riya Chakraborty by the CBI. So we have kept Riya Chakraborty and Sushant Singh Rajput as a tag in Twitter while using the search code that they will appear similarly same time in the tweets itself. So we have extracted over 123,000 tweets. It took a long time to extract that many tweets from Twitter using geotagging in India only, and also we have kept it to English language only. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for us to analyze in a software and through programming. So the primary data was basically from period 14 June to 23rd September. In between that. And the method of analysis was sentiment analysis with the help of Twitter API, which gives us access to the tweeters, and also Google Map API, which had the tweets. And we have used Tweepy package, tweepy.python, which is we have used Python programming to really analyze the sentiments, and without the help of NVivo software coding, it was not possible. So coming up to the findings part, this is to comparison of the two before arrest and after arrest influencers. So we were looking into the influencers, and we see that the two most important journalists, one is Meena Das Narayan, who was before arrest she was very popular and her discourse was being shared and followed by most of the people. But after the arrest, we see that she was not anywhere. And strikingly, another journalist, Samip Rajguru, he took it to a much higher level, and then after arrest his tweets were much more of the focus. There are many else things to discuss, but I'm not going into the details. I would request all of the learned friends and colleagues and teachers, my professors, to kindly go through the full paper that we have on this. So and also coming to this tweet comparison, that is the sentiment comparison, we see that there is a huge drop in the negative tweets after the arrest. So this is a very, very striking finding from our primary data that we have got. And we also see that there has been moderate loss in moderate positive tweets, and a little bit of increase in very positive tweets. So coming down to the word cloud, that we are trying to analyze the discourse, that what were the exact words that were being used during the the discourse on social media like Twitter. So we have run down that before arrest and after arrest. We see there is a striking difference between the use of Riya Chakraborty and Sushant Singh Rajput's name in the tweet itself. So it just, if we look at the after arrest, we see that the Riya Chakraborty and Sushant Singh Rajput's names are going down, and we see that support for Riya is coming up as a more important discourse on the after arrest analysis that we have done. So to conclude, I want to say that there are basically 7 conclusions that we come to a concluding remark, that that Sushant Singh Rajput was trending before the arrest, but Riya Chakraborty started arresting. It was justice for Sushant got replaced by justice for Riya. The major influencers changed, which I already discussed, and also the tweets, the drop between the negative tweets, also very sharp decline of the negative tweets, and also a little bit of decline in relation to the negative tweets have been seen. So moderate positive sentiment also decline helps to see that there has been a shift in the understanding of the peoples, and the sentiment of the people has changed from this primary data analysis. So thank you so much for listening to us. Over to you, ma'am.
My name.
Please go ahead.
Starting with the topic of my presentation today is construction of women's identity through Hindi film posters. So in the study, what we basically trying to find out is how Hindi film posters are portraying women, which is leading to make women define themselves in a certain way and with certain traits and qualities. Film posters are basically a form of communication which is used by the filmmakers in order to communicate to the audiences about the film, and it has various relevant informations about the film in it. A film poster uses various elements and symbols. If we talk about women, there are various symbols are used in posters which depicts different characteristics of women, which are then perceived in a way which varies from person to person, and it.
Shapna, have you shared your presentation?
Yes, ma'am, I did. Isn't it visible?
It is not showing at our. Go ahead. Yes, it is. If you can just make it full screen, yes.
Okay, so the topic for my presentation today is construction of women's identity through Hindi film posters. Through the study, what we are basically trying to find out is how Hindi film posters are portraying women, which is leading to make women define themselves in a certain way and with certain traits and qualities. So, ma'am, next slide, please. Film posters are basically
if you can just
of.
make it full screen, please.
Yes, ma'am.
We can see the sidebar of this. Okay.
Okay. So film posters are basically a form of communication which are used by the filmmakers in order to communicate to their audiences about the film, and they have relevant information about the film in the poster, like the name of the film, the title, the main protagonist, and the release date, and many more such relevant informations about the film they show in the posters. They use various symbols and elements. If we talk about when we talk about women, various symbols and elements are used in posters which depicts different characteristics of women, which are then perceived in a way which varies from person to person, and that way it helps in establishing a tag for women in the society. If we start looking at the very first full feature-length Hindi film, that is Raja Harishchandra in 1913.
Have you been changing slides?
Yes, ma'am. I have been changing the slides, but I don't know what is the problem.
No, but it's not showing at our end. Maybe it's showing, Surita.
Is it visible now, ma'am?
Yes. Yes, it is visible now. And if you can just click at the link on the bottom right, you have these three buttons, and make it full screen.
Yes, ma'am. When I'm doing full screen, it's not visible. So is it okay if I keep it to small screen, ma'am?
Okay, fair enough. Please go ahead.
Okay, moving ahead to the review of literature, we have sectioned the review of literature into 5 sections: representation of women in mass media, representation of women in films, represent construction of identity. So after the review of literature, we have come across various opinions that has been placed by various scholars and researchers. They are like women are primarily depicted in relationship to a men.
the cinematic representation of women reflects the reality of women's life. Some says that posters plays a very important role in the society, and in order to introduce a new change in the trend, they are the reflection of the changing time. It is also said by some that since the very inception of cinema, women have been portrayed with typical identities of emotionally and physically weak characteristics, which led their portrayal to be as they are their subsequent dependence on men. It is also said, it is also mentioned by one of the researchers that women are someone who seeks for help, and they are the one who needs to be saved. And fortunately, they encounter some male protagonist who is the so-called hero of a film, and then they get rescued. So through the literature that we have looked into, we have come across that not many research and study is done under this particular topic that I am accounting with, that is the construction of identity or representation of women in film poster, and only one I have come across with in Hindi film posters. So this really brought my interest into this subject basically. So the main work that has been done in the study is regarding how representation of women is done in film poster, and if objectification still exists, and if and what is the identity of women in Hindi film posters. So the main objective of the film is to find out how women has represented and how a construction of identity of women has been done. Methodology that is being used for the study is visual analysis, semiotic analysis, Gestalt analysis, and Martha C. Nussbaum's 7 types of objectification I have taken into account. For sampling, purposely I have selected women-centric film because the study does not only concern to the sexual objectification, which is very much prominent when we look at the male-centric films. Therefore, we have selected women-centric film starting from 2014 to 2018, and from every year we have selected 5 films according to the highest IMDb rating and box office collection. And in total, we have selected 2 to 4 posters from each year, and in total 14 posters in all. These are the posters that I have selected from our studies. A poster from the movie Queen, Piku, Pink, Dear Secret Superstar, Padmavati, and Razi. The finding after applying the Nussbaum's 7 type of objectification in the analysis of the poster, we have found that not only sexual objectification, but there are variety of types of objectification that has been done on women in the posters, in Hindi film posters. Like instrumentality was seen in 5 posters out of 14, denial of autonomy was seen 5 posters out of 14, and inertness 7 out of 14, fungibility 5 out of 14, valuability 1 out of 14, ownership 9 out of 14, and denial of subjectivity 9 out of 14. Moving ahead with the Gestalt, the elements which are, Gestalt is basically the type of elements which are used in a poster, which are not directly shown to be in link or in relation to the female or the women in the poster, but they somehow designate meaning in relationship to the women indirectly. So it is also seen that during the analysis that all the posters had these elements in it. That means Gestalt has been very much prominent in all the posters that we have analyzed. Moving ahead with the predominant identity that we have come across while our analysis in the 14 posters were women were shown to be dependent, they were shown to be vulnerable, they were shown to be wanting to be happy and free, someone who is always associated to a man. A middle class woman's identity is shown to be simple looking with big dreams and childlike and bubbly. Religious identity of a woman was shown very much strongly, whether they are of what religion they follow. If a woman is shown to be married, then the woman is always shown to have responsibilities, unlike the men in the poster who were married were not shown that way. It was also shown that women are the one who want to have freedom to do what they want, but at the same time they were shown at the first glance, when one looks at the poster, will find that the woman is looking independent, but the signs and symbols used are denoting otherwise about the women. Various types of attire attributes has been given, like simple and sober personality belongs to the person who wears salwar kameez. Pant and shirt designates to bold identity. Sari and traditional attire refers to dutifulness of a woman. out of 14, 10 posters had men representation into it. Although it was a women-centric film and the whole story revolves around the women, men were shown to be about women revealed through literature reviews has still seems to exist. And yet the way of representation of women has been changed. The way of representation of women in Hindi film posters today has become very subtle. One needs to be very much one has to be a keen observer in order to understand what kind of objectification or how they has been represented, and which is leading to the construction of a kind of identity of the women. And still objectification is very much prominent as still. And objectification is not only sexual objectification. When one understands about one's understanding about objectification is that only sexual objectification of women is done, but no, there are variety of type of objectification that is done in women, which we have come across in our study. Like the fungible objectification, woman is compared to some other object or some other being, a woman who is shown to be owned by some men, and many other type of objectification we have come across in our study. And lastly, I would say that her identity isn't just hers, it's the identity of her godfather, husband, father, and the society. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shwapna. And it was indeed a very interesting paper. And we look forward to questions from the participants. I'm sure there would be some. Thank you
so much, ma'am.
Dr. Pooja Basnet. Now we move on to the next education in Kerala University by Anju John, and she's from Department of Journalism, Mass Communication, and we also have Dr. Muhammad Ali Nelyulathil, I hope I pronounce it right, from University of Calicut. I hope the presenters are there. Anju John.
Might be some technical issue, perhaps.
Okay.
We can go to the next one by the time she joins back.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are audible.
Okay, Anju is not there?
Not right now. She was there, might be technical issue. We can go to the next one and then she can.
So the next presentation is When Actresses Turn into Activists, a content analysis of the official Facebook page of women actors of the Malayalam S. Gayatri. So she's from University of Calicut again. So S. Gayatri, if you have your presentation ready.
Yes, ma'am.
Please go ahead. You have 6 minutes.
Okay. So hello everyone. I'm Gayatri. So the title of the paper that I'll be presenting today is When Actresses Turn into Activists, a content analysis of the official Facebook page of women actors of the Malayalam film industry. So this is the overview of the area. Sorry, ma'am.
Please share your screen if you have your presentation.
Okay. Is it visible now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the title of the paper I'll be presenting. So these are the overview of the areas that will be discussed now. Now the films made in Malayalam industry from 2010 onwards is termed as new generation films or new gen cinema, because apart from focusing on filmmaking techniques, the content gave more space to women-centric stories. So it looked like things were changing for female actors. But all these efforts were put to test when an established female actor was abducted and brutally assaulted in a moving temple in Kochi in February 2017. Later, a prominent male actor was arrested in connection to this incident, and the support for the victim started to waver within the industry. So, with these developments, a few female actors technicians, singers, they formed an organization called Women in Cinema Collective in November 1st, 2007, which is one of its kind in India. It's called also called WCC. So this was to show solidarity to the victim and to carve a safe space and opportunity and equal opportunity for women in the film industry. So this was like a pivotal moment in any film industry where the female actors, they couldn't no longer be actors, so they had to voice for gender equality or the safety of women in the industry. So they slowly turned into activists. So the objective of the study is to analyze how or the actor to activist transformation in the Malayalam film industry, or how the online public see this transformation. So this is done by studying the comment section of Facebook posts on the official Facebook page of female actors in Malayalam industry. The methodology used is qualitative content analysis. Now the formation of WCC is taken as a point of reference. So the Facebook posts made before or pre-WCC formation and post-WCC formation were analyzed. The variable uses gender. So due to time constraint, only one female actress is selected. So this is the actress's page which was studied. Her name is Parvati Tiruvottu. She's a very prominent and contemporary actress in Malayalam industry right now, and she's a member of the WCC as well. So analyzing the Facebook posts that were made before the formation of WCC. So the time period taken was 2015 to 17. So her Facebook posts were mainly related to posts related to her movie releases or some photos that she uploaded. So there wasn't much of activism. Her activism was visible through her movies and the roles that she chose to perform. So there wasn't any visible activism on her part. Only through her movies was she was doing her activism. But she was actually one with really strong opinions. Now analyzing the post-WCC or the Facebook posts that were made after the formation of WCC. So one was the pertaining to the Kasaba controversy. So Kasaba is a movie. So Parvati spoke about a demeaning scene in this movie at a film festival in Kerala in December 2017. She said that she was disappointed to see a megation of those Facebook posts were also studied. These two were like big hits in Kerala. She was the main lead. Those were women-centric films, and she got a number of accolades for that movie as well. Also, posts which were related to the actor abduction case. Recently, some of the witnesses turned hostile, so she also posted some things related to this area. So the comment section under these Facebook posts were also analyzed. So these are the findings in the pre-WCC formation, where she only posted related to her movies and photos were posted. There, the comments were made largely by men, and there were mostly positive comments and some miscellaneous comments were there. And the comments were mostly appreciative of her acting ability and her physical appearance. And some were about queries on her next project, and some other miscellaneous comments were there. And even people used to call her Paru as a short name for Parvati, so that she was very well liked. That comments started to crop in, and the comments were mostly from men than women, but the difference in their number started to decrease. More women were coming up and commenting on her Facebook post. The positive comments could be categorized as supportive, those in favor of gender equality, and they were appreciative of whatever that she was posting. Also, about if she posted something on gender equality, people were appreciating that.
All right.
When it comes
So
to negative comments,
1 minute, Gayatri.
Okay, ma'am. Yeah, it's almost over. So the negative comments were made more by men than women. The negative comments could be considered as categorized as derogatory, threatening, resonating patriarchy, pertaining to whataboutism or whataboutery, cynical, and somewhere as a mockery. So the major finding is that there was a shift now in the number of negative comments. So now, especially men are posting more positive comments for the activist post that she's posting on Facebook. And more women have started to comment and show support. So in conclusion, the study showed that women in large numbers speaking out and showing support for matters relating to gender equality and patriarchy, issues related to patriarchy, and people are having a conversation on gender equality, patriarchy in film and film industry, and more men are showing support for gender equality. So, in a way, so the study concludes that there's a positive shift when a female actor is turning into an activist. She is voicing for gender equality. People are, or in this case, the online public is positively shifting. So first she was just nicknamed as Paru, then she was called Feminichi. Now everyone is seeing her as Parvati, an individual, an actor, and an activist, and they're seeing their strength and her acting ability, everything. So that is a very positive shift happening, and that's the conclusion of the study. Thank you.
Sweta, you're mute.
Yeah, thank you, Gayatri. Very interesting presentation, and it's very encouraging to see this positive shift in gender discourse. So I hope there will be more questions on this in the time that we have, and we move to the next presentation. I can see Kinkini Das here.
Hello, ma'am. Am I
The
audible?
next one. Just one sec. Your presentation is on classroom strategy of teachers, the
Yeah,
case of gender sensitive journalism. The previous presentation
Yeah,
which
yes.
we
Can you
couldn't
see
take.
my? Yeah, yes, ma'am. Can you see my PPT, ma'am?
No.
Yeah. If I'm able to present the thing without the PPT.
That should work, but can you give it a try?
Yeah. But,
try sharing your presentation. If it doesn't work,
it's
yes.
showing present now. That's what's on.
Can you stop the presentation and retry?
Okay,
and share your screen.
Ma'am. Sorry, ma'am. I couldn't make it possible, ma'am. I'm so sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, the former presenters were very concerned about the gender issues, gender unequal society, and here I would like to suggest one of the solution to eradicate such thing from the society. And first of all, thank you so much giving such an opportunity to present my paper. And I am here presenting my paper on classroom strategy of teachers, the case of gender sensitive journalism education in Kerala. As we all know, gender sensitivity refers to unequal treatment of perceptions of individual based on their gender. It arises from difference in socially constructed gender roles. Gender systems are often dictonymous and hierarchical, and gender binary system may reflect the inequality that manifests numerous dimensions of daily life. Most often, it accounts the violation of common civil rights in public life or unequal treatment of men and women with no reason. Given this profound impact of gender on human life, both personalized discourses gender sensitive academics has been gathering moments for last few decades in pedagogical science and gender studies circuits, as it is expected to contribute a gender responsive social culture. Teaching and curriculum, learning mechanism, aspects of the educational system at any level will positively influence the learners. And the gender sensitivity, why gender sensitivity in media education is media is considered as the mirror of the society, and the best approach is to sensitize media to gender neutral practices. This is possible only when media education is mainstreamed, both theory and practices. And when it comes to the study, it is about classroom strategy of teachers, the case of gender sensitive journalism education in Kerala universities. The objective of the study is to find out how gender sensitive factors are incorporated in the classroom strategy of teachers in university level journalism education. Methodology, qualitative focus group discussion with journalism teachers. The focus group or focus group interviewing in a research strategy for understanding people's attitude and behavior. For 6 to 12 people are interviewed simultaneously with a moderate leading respondents in a relative unstructured discussions about the topic under investigation. It have no role in changing perspective of students related gender issues. One is providing special attention to the vulnerable group widens the gap, and the prime responsibility of a teacher is to maintain equality among the students, and the students have already developed social attitudes and opinion from their higher education, and making it impossible for teacher to change the notion of PG level. And my conclusions are most of the teachers believe that classroom strategy is one of the effective way to eradicate gender inequality from the journalism classroom, and giving special attention from the vulnerable group is considered as another effective method. Giving special assignments and zero tolerance toward misogynic comments are some of the effective way to eradicate such issues. The approach towards generative curriculum and the syllabi lacks proper policy, and the direction also help to maintain gender attitude. And interestingly, transgender perspectives do not find any single reference from the teachers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we now go on to the last presentation of the day, which is Digital Gender Divide in the Times of Pandemic by Kinkini Dasgupta Mishra, a scientist with Vigyan Prasad. So kindly begin.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, all. Greetings from Prasad, Department of Science and Technology. We feel it extremely privileged to be amongst you all. We represent the science media wing of DST. So our approach to this topic and theme on women and media as a whole will be through the lens of scientific communication. My co-presenter, Tusha, will run the presentation. So I'll start. The digital gender divide includes all the inequalities between men and women in terms of access to information and communication technologies. The following report is 2018 GSMA Mobile Gender Gap Report, which depicts gender gap in mobile internet use in low and middle income countries by the region. The darker red gradient signifies a deeper divide, and the map definitely depicts India's position. We need to fill in the 70% gap to be gender harmonious. The other figure gives a deeper insights into the gender distribution in percentage. It clearly signifies that the male gets a head over in access and affordability of the ICTs and other digital technologies. While there do exist economic barriers to girls owning a mobile phone or laptop, cultural and social norms also play a major part. The male-female gap in mobile use often intensifies other inequalities for women, including access to information, economic opportunities, and networking. The ICT in pandemic gets a hype. E-commerce has the potential to level the economic playing field for women in developing countries. Government, the private sector, and the programs, the funding programs and civil society need to team up to ensure women's digital access, and action is needed both on policy and the skills base. Digital technologies are being harnessed to support the public health response to COVID-19 in the country, including population surveillance, case identification, contact tracing, and evaluation of interventions on the basis of mobility data and communication with the public. These rapid responses leverage billions of mobile phones, large online data sets, connected devices, relatively low-cost computing, initiated telemedicine and online healthcare facilities across the country. The online learning and training, what has been made clear through this pandemic is the importance of disseminating knowledge across borders, organizations, and all parts of society. If online learning technology can play a role here, it is the incumbent upon all of us to explore its potential, full potential. The learning strategy integrates mobile technology that enables learning to be carried out without limits, that is a seamless, anywhere, anytime, and any way of context of learning based on the characteristics, needs, and desires of the learners which were promoted. Digital payment is another that ICT tool that has helped in increase in. We see that a lot of enhancement or escalation of violence against women, economic and social stresses combined with movement restrictions and cramped homes are driving a surge in gender-based violence. Many of these women are now confined at home with their abusers and at increased risk of other forms of violence as overloaded healthcare systems and disrupted justice services struggle to respond. With more women, people spending time online with movement restrictions in place, online forms of violence against women and girls in chat rooms, gaming platforms are more
Ma'am,
likely
5 minutes
to
running.
increase. Women, especially in essential service and informal sectors such as doctors, nurses, and street vendors, are at heightened risk of violence as they navigate deserted urban and rural public spaces and transportation services during lockdown. Cyber crime, cyber violence, even though cyber violences take place online, it affects women offline and has real world implications. Some examples of cyber violence which we are already aware of is online harassment, threatening, bullying, blackmailing, unwanted sex texting, stalking, hate speech, and many such things, recording and distribution of sexual assault, and many more which are affecting the physical and emotional health and as well as mental health. Now, coming to how ICT solution to closing the gender digital divide increases women's access to information. Digital technology enables access to critical health services and opportunities for education, civic participation, and economic engagement. Digital technology is a means to ensure the provision of basic services and livelihood opportunities. It acts as a vital gateway for women to access information that can improve their livelihoods and significantly enhances their ability to contribute to the
If you
family.
can just, yeah,
Yes.
Kinkini, that's what we have limitation. If you can just wind up in a
Okay,
minute.
fine. So leverage the private sector and government focus on reaching last mile population through digital platforms, increased connectivity, and increased opportunities. Applying the gender lens to the COVID response, infrastructure, the promotion of indigenous ICT development under Atmanirbhar Abhiyan can play a significant role. The promotion of budget mobile phones is the key. Digital literacy and skills. Digital literacy needs special attention at the school and the college level. The National Digital Literacy Mission would focus on introducing digital literacy at the primary school level in all government schools for basic content. Then coming to the last slide, the conclusion. The digital technologies are not the end, but the means. The objective in using the technology is that it can be used to help reduce. It should be seen as an enabler that permits all stakeholders to collaborate in combating inequality, and COVID-19 should not have infringed on the women's digital rights in doing so. COVID-19 opportunity to propel efforts towards bridging the digital divide. It has also brought to light that digital divide is no longer a topic, but something affecting people's access to opportunities and inclusion in the communities. In addition to addressing the community's needs, closing the digital divide also means ensuring technology is non-discriminatory and accessible to all people in the community, including internet access, devices, and information. Digital technologies make it possible for government to maintain and provision of basic services and livelihood opportunities. Human rights are part and parcel of the public health responses to crisis and digitalization. So women must feel safe in both the real and the virtual worlds. Partnership to overcome the digital divide must be maintained beyond the outbreak. All sectors of society have a role in ensuring that we have no one and no place behind. In the current and post response to COVID-19, it will be essential for government to foster innovative partnership with civil society, private sector, to address and progressively close the digital divide. To conclude, digital media enables women.
I think we can take this up maybe even more.
And collective intelligence to create a growth mindset and close the gender gap. And ICT can be an active learning environment, creating a virtual space for better negotiations, able to make informed choices, and able to identify their strengths and weaknesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is a very, very topical concern. We are all kind of witnessing this digital divide, and we are all concerned about it as to how to reach out to more and more women through different programs of the government in terms of resources, access, technology, and network, how to make women kind of move on to the digital platforms and things like that. These are huge concerns in these times, these unusual times. So we have some, I have to ask Surita, how much time do we have really for the question? Because I see a few questions in the
a lot
chat
of
box
questions have come actually, yes, right.
Yes.
But we actually overshot by almost 15 minutes.
So how much time do we have for the question?
So actually, we have no time for the question. But if you
No
want,
time for
maybe
question
one
answers.
question, whatever is, it's your call. If you want, we can go with one questions
Okay.
and yeah.
Okay. So I think there is this question by Dr. Sanjana Sharma, Amity University. She's talking about the objectification of women. It was earlier and still prominent. So she is saying, but the way objectification through film poster has become, it's subtle. So she is actually, this is a comment and this is not a
Yeah,
question here.
yeah, and I think
So
many
I'll
of the respondents, presenters have already started responding to the questions there. Many of the
yeah,
presenters have
there's this
answered.
YouTube question by there's this YouTube question by Sagarika Dash. She's asking, government should come across with more infotainment programs so that they can be entertained and informed rather than only entertained. So this is again a suggestion, not really a question. Then she adds, maybe need, no, there's another question by Dr. Sanjana Sharma. She's how have posters changed from earlier times to now? So there was this presentation on the posters. So if Gayatri, oh, is this Shapna? Shapna, you are there?
Yeah, yes, ma'am, I'm here.
So there's this question for you, Shapna, that she's saying that how have posters changed from earlier times to now? So if you can just very briefly respond to that.
Basically, posters have indeed changed in the way of their representation, but the main idea, that is the objectification of women, is still there. And the only change that I can tell about, which I have concluded through my analysis, is that the way of representation and way of objectification and the way of how identity construction is done through posters has been changed. It has become very much subtle these days, that one has to be a very keen observer in order to understand the various type of objectification that is done through poster these days, unlike earlier when it was very much visible that sexual objectification of women was done. But these days the way of representation has been changed through posters. So yeah, that would be my answer to that.
All right. And I think there was this in the beginning, this was first question. I think Tamasa Ghosh had asked. So she says, recently I watched Malayalam film named Kumbalangi Nights. This film subtly destroys toxic masculinity and showcases vulnerable side of men. Do you think mainstream regional films have the power to change the gender stereotyping? So this is the last question for the session. So maybe Dr. Shamala can answer this because she had the presentation on the topic.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am. Yeah. There are only few movies, which are there. When you see at a larger scale, okay, it's like, very, very minute these movies are there. So more positive stereotyping will be able to portray, to take out all these kind of stuff and play more gender equality roles should be more shown.
All right. Thank you. I think we end the session here, and thank you all the presenters, and I thank all the participants and the organizers for the session, and I hand over the session, and my co-chair especially, I hand over the session to the organizers.
Thank you, Sweta. Thanks a lot. You have managed to restrict the time quite a lot as possible. Thanks a lot. I'll request Ivy, if she's there, to officially end the session and.
Yes, I'm there. Thank you so much, Sweta ma'am, for giving us so much time for last 2 days. It was a great pleasure that you are with us. On behalf of my college and my department, I would like to express my gratitude to you. Thank you so much, ma'am, again. Now,
Thank you.
I call upon Mrs. Roshni Roy Mukherjee, a faculty member of Women's College, Calcutta, to conduct the valedictory session. Over to you, Roshni ji.
I just introduce Professor Abhi Chattopadhyay is an eminent academician, author and renowned vocalist. He is presently working as the head of the Department of the Journalism and Mass Communication, S.A. Joypuria College, University of Calcutta. With more than 18 years of teaching experience, he is also serving as the chairman, Undergraduate Council, Board of Studies, Journalism and Mass Communication, University of Calcutta. He wrote multiple books on communication studies, and also he was an information and public relations officer at Bengal National Chambers of Commerce and Industry. So now I would like to invite Sir for his valedictory session on Between Women and Media Configuring a Margin of Marginalities. Now Shurita say something about Sir.
Yes, I'll just add two or three notes on that. Actually, I worked in many places and came to Kolkata just few years back, and in this meantime, I had quite many times interacted with many of the colleagues and had opportunity to interact with Abhijit few times relating to university works. And in that aspect, whatever little interactions I had with him, I'll like to quote one of Eleanor Roosevelt's very famous quote that great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. Whenever I have spoken with you, sir, you have already always spoken about ideas, theories, concepts, and that is what I remember of you. And this conversation, this academic exploration, and this culture of good conversation, valuable confirmation, that has always inspired. And always, I try to address my students in that respect that to be a good human being is something, and education comes with good culture, and that's what you should aspire to, not just degree. So I'll expect all my students to follow your footsteps and be always that much vocal about your theoretical aspects and ideas, and inspire students in such discussions, sir. Thank you so much for joining today, sir. It's a privilege, sir. Thank you so much. Over to you, sir.
Okay, I'm pampered and respected principal madam, respected all the chairpersons. First, let me know, am I audible to everyone? Am I audible to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Dear Dr. Shurita, dear Professor Roshmi, dear Professor Ushoshi, dear Professor Rilina Kanjilar, and many others of my very close association. So while congratulating all speakers and chairpersons of all sessions of this international seminar, the validation of this international seminar can only be surmised, I think, in the form of a philosophical validation of the broad narrative of yours and the important areas covered, legitimizing the broad topic of this fruitful seminar. So my diction shall try to make a theoretical trajectory that would sum up probably all the topics of discussion in this today's seminar. Following famous French post-structuralist Jacques Derrida's famous idea that inauguration of any argument must assume unified origins for its founding terms in order to get started. So starting with your concept note, which has been written first and then spoken later in multiple papers in a series, as a series of what we call it semiologically signifieds, it can be surmised that the graph of your note has tried to cover all possible contours and somewhere even beyond that, for obvious reason not to miss out any narrative under the grand one. The speakers must have followed the line with their independent analytical arguments. In the light of that, let me argue on the topic of women and media, the broad topic in which there has always been a, I think, double bind on, firstly, women as a narrative has been chiefly exposed, as many of your papers have already shown, chiefly exposed by various media, rather a media culture, in which one of the papers tried to find out politics of voice in the global perspective of media culture. Since globalization hit the country or the third world in 3 decades ago, it was a very much unlike what the exposition was in earlier days, although theorists like Raymond Williams, famous British Marxist, Williams, analyzed feminist, rather women question long before the technological blast and media explosion in categorically in 1960s in US, 1970s in the rest of the developed world, and finally 1990s with the globalization program in the third world nations. Secondly, the narrative women in remote corners of the society and households have had grown as a very complicated structure during this period behind media eyes, as many of your papers have already established. Now a question may be asked whether women articulated in media and women as developed in the public sphere remains dialectical or dialectical to each other or just juxtaposed. Your concept note has started with a very interesting note. Quote, during this pandemic, there has been an unprecedented global rise of domestic violence and abuse against women. However, simultaneously, there are examples of many women leaders managing this disastrous situation. And at the end of the note, it has asked very interestingly, what is the nature of expressed in favor of a communicative juxtaposition when interviewed to save his notion of communicative action in the public sphere. In a very determinate context of multinational capitalism, when it was growing in 1970s and 1970s and 1980s, multinational capitalism and today's globalized capitalism, he described it an unfinished project since enlightenment. So it is being probably it's getting clear the Habermas's views. My point of argument starts, therefore, not on the issue, because you must have discussed that in detail in this seminar, but to ask you, the people, whether these two aspects, violence against women, on the women, and managing the situation, whether dialectical to each other or juxtaposed. Do we need now, my question is, do we need to find a cultural dominance, as I have borrowed it from Frederick Jameson, as Jameson mentioned, out of a holistic grand systemic structure? So it is important to note that how they are related to each other, to note what is the nature. The global intelligentsia has long been in this debate, knowing enough that the finality of all such discussion rests in this debate. Liberals, positivists, since the early Enlightenment age, liberals, positivists, Marxists, semiologists, rather linguists, post-structuralists, postmodernists, and post-colonial theorists have various contours of ideological endpoints, what Jameson mentioned as axioteleological points. In contrast to the earlier monopoly capitalism, then after the Second World War, tech capitalism, and today's global corporate capitalism. The sociological tradition up to this crossroad, where Habermas stood there, as you mentioned, promoted the concept of juxtaposition as at such a postmodern point where which is ever repetitive in any situation. As many of your papers for such a long time have been discussing issues and managing issues and managing. In every such repetition, violence and managing, there are certain, I'm borrowing Raymond Williams, residual concepts to handle that, and some emergent, rather, I prefer to call it catalytic emergence of concepts of maybe protesting or maybe protecting the rise at the same time. In the public sphere, the cathartic outburst, the communicative outburst of both residual and emergent production of concepts often blame very common targets like social institutions to actually hit a largely utopian idea of a system cushion sitting anywhere in the suitable public spheres, pardon my language. Secondly, the concept note has had interestingly mentioning that when the compression of time and space has revolutionized human understanding of being, the concept of identity itself has transcended the ever-growing dubious realm of reality in the postmodern era. You have hyphenated it, post-modern era. My humble question is, do really human identity in aggregate transcend the reality of the postmodern era? If so, all matters are then resolved. Obviously, no. What therefore categorically happens in the postmodern era? Let us quote Frederick Jensen here. It is empirically arguable that our daily lives, our psychic experience, our cultural languages are today dominated by space rather than the categories of time in the preceding period of high modernism proper. So here we have enough instances to establish that the space in the era of media globalization has been completely detached from individual and other social categories of time in the era of media globalization. So even if the time is eclipsed by the newer technology generated space, remains bound in virtual, both off and over. The new combined or double bond structure has hugely lives so far. We are gradually dependent upon the space, regardless of our all earlier social identities. This is the consumptive identity, not a consumer. We are all, no. This is a natural consumption. We're saying that technique by what technology, the communication technology has served or has already taken for granted. So Jensen, while defining the postmodern era, as your concept note mentioned, in this continues arguing, I will request you to please listen to it very carefully. I am far from feeling that all cultural productions today is postmodern. In the broad sense, I will be conferring on this term. The postmodern is, however, the force-filled, I have underlined it, force-filled, in which very different kinds of cultural impulses, what Raymond Williams has usefully termed residual and emergent forms of cultural productions, must make their way. If we do not, Jensen continues, if we do not achieve some general sense of a cultural dominant, then we fall back into a view of present history as sheer heterogeneity. So heterogeneity is not natural. Random difference, a coexistence of a host of distinct forces whose effectivity, that is all research outcomes, you can say effectivity is undecidable, what Jensen was of opinion. In this way, I quoted famous post-structural, post-colonial figures, one of the very important post-colonial figures, Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak, who is saying, we often try to obliterate the subject position when we talk about our world, when we depict our world, when we denote our world, when we designate our world. So this is a very important point. What therefore happens really is that the series of violence and managing access are being formed and then voided away as media stop, or a particular media stops covering that. We therefore do not consummate the subject elements but obliterate, as Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak is of opinion, what even we observed in the forced juxtaposition of events, what in Jensen's version, sheer heterogeneity and random difference, how the subject position have often been obliterated in our world, being replaced by mediated subject conditions. The seminar probably had the answer. Thirdly, this is my last segment. The multiplicity, I'm quoting your note, the multiplicity of collective identity promoting a looking natural heterogeneity is thus, therefore, not natural to both Jensen and Spivak, which creates such a problem where finding a permanent solution of any problem becomes a very ideal statement which we communicate in every bit, but prefer, I repeat, we communicate in every bit, but prefer a forced juxtaposed conditions every time. So what happens? So what appears rather as the natural heterogeneity is that we prefer, we have actually been caught in the interplay. Now I am referring to French post-structuralist Job Baudrillard. In the interplay of the residual and the emergent forms of cultural productions and research outcomes. Residual forms are usually traditional forms being projected as the revival of both in the contemporary social network systems like associations, forums, subcultural groupings, common addas, in the mass media contents, especially soap operas, news bulletins, reality shows, often found institutionally highly empowered. The emergent forms are also equally empowered and sometimes appear to be alternative, but largely complementary to ensure the juxtaposition of both violence has ranged from, for over the years, has ranged from Kashmir issue to every bit of harassment and molestation of girl children, to semi-porn videos projected even in social media, even in Facebook. So the multiplicity often is downsized into a hyper masculinity. One of your papers said hyper masculinity. Why hyper? I have made a distinct equation. Coded masculinity over actual masculinity, that is violence in social sector, in the public sphere, is a bit problematic. that encompasses collective identities. Narrow caste communication practice, that is when we talk in the seminars and others high valued discussions or high valued audience, with a high valued audience, narrow caste communication practices. Secondly, what is socially developed as broadcast codes, which often hardly come out of so-called interviews and so-called surveys. And thirdly, what actually is the condition of the victim woman and her situation, all three make a massive, unsurmountable edifice we now, as per my experience goes, truly or somehow ignore by closing our eyes. Here, all the psychological tools, ID, ego, and superego, work simultaneously as forgetting tools, as we are trapped probably in the obnoxious knot of what reality is, what symbolic is. When you are analyzing posters, there is a symbolic one, and what imaginary is. The reality shows, the news bulletins, and the soap operas of media in this triangle, very similar to, I think, finally, the horizontal axis of penis preference, commonly described, and the actuality is being in working condition on the same plane of broad cultural production system, both society and the mediated society. I prefer to call it a system in order to, in all cases of violence against women, that is, for example, Nirbhaya case, there was a case, Jamlo Mogdam, where there was no case, and Monisha Balmiki case, where there is a case, and many others. All three elements have formed the axis of being independently operative. The system remains chiefly operative in, obviously, as we all already know that in media operation and empowered social communication. So as long as media operate according to Habermas, public sphere will operate outside according to Habermas, because media do not need public sphere. Why? Because media creates its own mass, own audience. So it needs a clear mass sphere, where finessing both residual and emergent is being produced in the particular cultural codes. So to govern this axis, are separately empowered by a government, corporate, axioteleological objective is somehow working there for a long time since our independence. That is, they do govern to earn a definite value favoring to them. The finessing mode of cultural production dominated by global media conglomerates nowadays have naturally a huge impact over public sphere, where independent social communication practices toward describing an event are being largely influenced by this finessing factor, where social communicator hardly communicates independent statements. So they prefer to communicate the graphematic, cathartic statement as projected in the mass media in the public sphere. So in this so by virtue of this finessing factor over cultural production, both mass sphere and the public sphere, it is already overlapping one over another. And in this overlapping case, the actual condition of the victim woman is being largely suppressed, except many such conditions where the victim women have been getting the refuge, have been getting shelter, have been rehabilitated. Yes, I can't ignore that. But India is a very big country, and the South Asia is a very big region. So it's largely being suppressed and ignored in spite of being projected all aspects of the event in mass media and social media. I therefore need to support your statement which says, quote, adding to this is the surreal surrounding of present time, where human experience is baffling. Your concept was very interesting, is baffling human narratives in an attempt to formalize the reality, except using the word surreal surrounding, which I can't agree with, as postmodern condition has always been a very forced kind of condition that maintains heterogeneity by juxtaposing the events and the event codes deliberately, both event and event codes deliberately. Lastly, we all therefore need to find out what Jensen preferred, a cultural dominant. What is that? Extending which appears a cultural dominant code behind all kinds of violence against women. Rather, I would prefer the term borrowing Gayatri Chakraborty's Vivak, the subaltern, violence against who are already oppressed. So violence against who are already socially, temporarily oppressed. Any horizontal or juxtaposed alternative otherwise would fall into a forced heterogeneity of events and larger heterogeneity of event codes produced by media and dominant institutions. Thank you very much. But before I thank you, finally, I have not preferred to mention the Atman factor, what you're noting. I fondly have not preferred to mention this Atman factor, which I extremely like your inclusion in the concept note. I believe that this is the only area left not finessed, probably anyhow, by the externality of the forced postmodernism, which I need to quote Rabindranath, that our identity has an Atman which is so rock solid and unchangeable, and as internality and the externality we earn. So in the externality by this Atman, we can find the culturally dominant code to actually not to repeat it, not to repeat our analysis or with newer issues, but try to find out a finishing or axioteleological code which is absolutely necessary. Now I thank you very much, and I express my gratitude to my respected principal, Dr. Mohammed Dash, and all my fellow colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable speech.
Thank you so
And
much.
thank you, sir, for finding time for us in such the difficult times. It is honored to have you with us. Okay. So now these 2 days international webinar, the last we just reached in the last, that is the time for vote of thanks. So I just start. A very good evening, everyone present here, which it gives me Reshmi Roy Mukherjee, Faculty of Journalism and Mass Communication, Women's College, Calcutta. Great pleasure to extend a vote of thanks on the behalf Department of Journalism and Mass Communication. Women's College, Calcutta, in collaboration with IQAC, conducting a 2-day international webinar on women and media, the changing narratives and identities. First of all, I like to thank Dr. Mohua Dash, Principal of Women's College, Calcutta, for her initiative for organizing this international webinar. Moreover, I would like to thank Professor Piyush Kanti Panigrahi, Head of the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication, University of Calcutta, for his gracious presence. I would also like to thank Dr. Geely K, lecturer, Media and Communication, University of Leicester, UK, and Professor Jayashree Zetvani, Senior ICSSR Research Fellow, ISID India, for their valuable keynote speech. I would extend my vote of thanks to Dr. Fatima N, Assistant Professor of AJK Mass Communication Research Center, Jamia Millia University, and Professor Ujjwala Varve, Head of the Department of Journalism, Savitribai Phule Pune University, chaired the plenary sessions. And also thanks to yesterday plenary session speaker, Miss Ruchi Negi, Miss Neha Chopra, Miss Esha Pal, and also today's plenary session speaker, Dr. Clary, Dr. Monisha Quadri, Dr. K.S. Kritika, and Mrs. Padvini Jain. It also gives me immense pleasure to thank Dr. Sweta Singh, Assistant Professor of University of School of Communication, Guru Govind Singh Indraprastha University, New Delhi. Also, we enriched by the paper presenters who presented their respective papers on various topics. Hence, we want to share our vote of thanks to each one of them for their valuable contributions. Also, thanks to Professor Abhi Chattopadhyay for his valedictory speech. Special thanks to IQAC Committee of Women's College Calcutta and organizing committee of this webinar. Our guest introducer, Srimati Shanghita Bhattacharya, Dr. Madhumita Dash, and special thanks to Srimati Shushmita Mitra for first day's vote of thanks. I will also thank our all departments.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shanghita. Let's end the scene. Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.